Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna da Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube. And the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars: A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast grim dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Hello, everyone. Good evening. It is so good to have you here. Welcome to Table Talk. Welcome to my home. Welcome to the office. We are going to be talking about tonight Truby's work. This is our second evening talking about John Truby's book, The Anatomy of Genres. Tonight we are going into chapter, let's see, I believe it's 3. Yes, 3 and 4, talking about the genres of action and myth. And so to talk about that tonight, who else would we have with us but Douglas A. Burton and Brianna da Silva? Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Awesome. Good to see everybody, by the way.
Doug, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone what it is that you are doing?
Sure.
Your book right here.
My name is Douglas Burton, and I am an author. My debut novel was Faraway Bird, and it was about Byzantine Empress Theodora. While writing the book, I struggled with story structure, with the hero's journey in particular, which led me to a 4-year deep dive analysis sabbatical, which led me to write The Heroine's Labyrinth, a story that provides an alternative structure with 18 unique archetypal events centered around my study of heroines across a massive landscape of stories. So, and that will be available on pre-order February 27th, and it will be officially launched March 26th. Can't wait.
February 27th. So that's coming up very soon.
Very
Mark your
soon.
calendars, everybody.
Two
Yeah.
weeks, basically.
Yes, 2 weeks. It's amazing because it feels like it's taking forever, and then suddenly it's just going to be here.
All right. So we covered Faraway Bird here on the channel. So definitely look up Faraway Bird pick up Faraway Bird and then watch our analysis of the subject. And of course, we've been covering the Heroine's Labyrinth quite a bit here on this channel. There are going to be a lot of clips about the Heroine's Labyrinth coming out as soon as the pre-order goes live.
Yeah.
Brianna.
Yep. So I am an author and a writer-director. I have my first novel, which is there on the screen, City of Reckoning. It's an epic fantasy book. And then I am also working right now on building my portfolio materials for making my stab in Hollywood. So I'm working on like short films and some screenplays and stuff like that. And meeting once a month with Cameron, who is on here frequently. So that's what I'm about.
And how's that going?
Really good. I just met with him today. And yeah, I've done a couple like practice short films where I was like just working on various things I wanted to practice. And then I'm preparing for what will be my more like portfolio piece. And he looked over my screenplay for that last month, and then I did a new draft, and he thinks it's almost there, so he thinks it's very close now. So
Awesome.
Yeah. So that was fun. It was I learned a lot this month studying kind of the precise this is stuff that we could talk about another time, but like we talked on this channel a lot about like the broad levels of horror, about structure and stuff, and I was going into depth on like how you execute specific scares and like the timing of it. So I did a deep dive on that on my own this past month to write that new draft. So, and he thought it was scary now. So I'm like, yes. So yeah, so that's been fun.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. A lot of work.
And then also, please come over and check out The Cultists. That's written by Brianna and me. Brianna and I co-wrote this show. I produced it. Brianna directed it. This is our horror comedy series. Oh yeah. I got it. Here, hold those up. Hang on. Keep those up. I'm going to solo you. So there you go. You got the screenplays in.
Yeah, it was hard to do because I'm not mirrored. Wait.
Yeah.
So, we made these little it's the screenplays. We made into little books.
We made them into books. So there they go. So there we go. So there we go.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
So yes, so
it's on my shelf with other screenplays now.
Right. We wanted to have I wanted to have all the things that I had written on my shelf, which included the scripts to those. So The Cultists, the first 3 episodes are up on YouTube right now. So please do
the rest
or subscribe to those. Yeah. But you also get director's commentary from Brianna and producer's commentary from me, as well as the episode. So please do go and check those out.
Awesome.
All right, then. All right. So Truby.
Mr. Truby.
Round two for Truby. So the purpose here was to go into, I'm going to move my keyboard out of the way so I can look at my notes here that I took in the book. We're talking about action and myth tonight.
Yes.
It's so fun and so relevant to so many things that.
Well, it is. I mean, a lot of this material that I was reading did seem relevant to a lot of the things that I like to read and watch, whether it's a movie or whatever. And then also relevant to the kinds of things that the three of us are creating.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty good.
So far, all 3 genres we've talked about have been that way for me. So.
Well, that's true. We went through horror as well. I guess we should, if somebody is new here. So here is what he's doing. I guess we should set up the whole situation with what Truby is trying to do, which I thought was rather unique. I had not seen this before. When he's talking about different genres, and he's got a bunch of different genres in this book, and he organizes these according to a hierarchy and a ladder about human I mean,
Human experience, pretty much.
Human experience, human needs, the order in which you need to address things in your life. I mean, it's kind of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Of storytelling in kind of a way. So when we talked about horror, which we did last time, we talked about this with horror. He was talking about that's dealing with confronting death and ghosts from the past, and basically dealing with whether or not you're going to live or die. Oh, there went Brianna.
Brianna.
But whether or not you're going to live or you're going to die. And he said that was a foundational, the foundational genre because it deals with life and death. So when you're dealing with horror, which is an idea that I'm going to bring up later, that we're not talking about the emergence of these stories, at least historically. I'm not sure if actually, but at least historically, because he's going to talk about what are the earliest stories later.
Yeah, because he says
the earliest story might. I'm sorry?
I think he says myth is considered like
right. The earliest story that he's going to say that we have access to is myth, but that he's still putting as the foundational story horror because we're dealing with life and death. But then he says that once you've decided whether or not you're going to live or you're going to die, which is what we're talking about horror, you have to decide what you're going to do with yourself. And he says that's what action deals with. So that's why he puts action second on the ladder. So first on the ladder is horror. Are you going to live or are you going to die? Okay, if you've decided to live, then you've got to decide what to do.
What defines success for you? Yeah.
Yeah. How do you find success then? Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's like a increasing levels of meaning too, where it's like, okay, I just want to make sure I survive. Although that was my issue with that chapter. I still feel like horror is more about suffering versus, or just avoiding suffering, which I think is more fundamental than life or death, to be conscious, but whatever. But then it's like, okay, what's more meaningful than that is success, as opposed to, because like, well, as we'll get into, you could still die and yet win in an action story. And then
well, but usually action stories are about more of an intelligent, like human style back and forth, whereas horror, you either get something supernatural or like predatorial, that sense of like survivalism, I guess.
More like an animal experience.
Sort of. So I think I understand what he's trying to say there with horror being the most primal, pure survivalism. And by the way, I think even attempting to rank these into a hierarchical tree, part of me thinks that's insane. It's extremely ambitious and it's very intriguing. Like I'm intrigued by this idea. Like I think you said Maslow's pyramid of genre.
Yeah, that's
I love that description because that's essentially what he's attempting to do.
Right. That's why what you just said, Doug, when we were talking about it last time, is why I was so interested in it. I'm not really sure I'm bought into it, but I've never seen anybody do this before, and so I'm intrigued by it. I'm intrigued by the idea.
Well, even Vogler said we're like, what do you think about Truby? He's like, guys, he's like, what did he say? He was a genius.
He said I'm intimidated by him.
Yeah. Now, Vogler was very big on this, especially when Truby was talking about transcending genres and things like that. When we talked to Vogler, he was, that's true. He was very much, and of course, he didn't talk. I don't want to overstate his opinion.
Well, he had,
but he was very much, it seemed, in favor of it, and especially with the idea of transcendence and things like that, and what that means.
Yeah, he said he was a something genius. He had some reservation, but he also recognized that there's some genius here, and I think the genius comes in just the approach like this hierarchical view of genres as a hierarchy of storytelling, what it means underneath the hood, what it means from a human perspective, and what he has decided to be a more advanced state of genre as you go. Not better or worse, but more advanced in terms of like human relevance or human ascendancy. So anyway, horror is his number one, and
or is his base? It's horror is the base,
right? The primal,
Yeah.
the primeval, pure survivalism. That's horror, and his next one up is action, and then above that, myth. And by the way, I don't know if I agree with him. However, I haven't done my homework enough to have offered a viable alternative. To me, I feel like I would start with myth, but if his position is that as a human animal, survivalism is the first square on the board, and then once you have survived and you're doing something and you're there, now you need to define success. And once you've defined success and you become good at it, now you are in a position to create a civilizational myth story. If
Yeah,
that's what he's
specifically
saying, that might make sense. Sorry,
and then myth being specifically about like what is your destiny, like what is your role, what is it that you're meant to do, kind of a thing. So that's adding another level of meaning.
Yeah, because it's increasing me, right? So actually, I like what Sable just said right here. Sable says he's increasing story genres from belief and increasing complexity of self-awareness.
Yeah,
that's why the
I
Maslow
think
pyramid is so perfect.
Basically says so in myth, right? Because there's an increase in I like that terminology, increase in self-awareness according to his philosophy. I'm trying to understand his philosophy here between action and myth, because action is to be successful in doing things. In order to be successful, you must do things. Okay, but you can do things and still end up hollow.
Right. So
and you could be great but not good, which is
right.
Really
great but not good. Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And so he says in here, myth, seeking immortality by trying to find your destiny in life. So in that case, it's not enough just to do. You need to do something meaningful in order to find immortality.
You need to be.
Right. You need to be.
You need to be someone. Yeah.
I just wanted to say what's so ambitious and brilliant and then bizarre about this idea of a hierarchy of genre is, and I haven't gotten over this yet. Maybe at some point this will all get in and I'll understand it at some higher level, but like it leads to some bizarre things. Like, so if this is a progression of self-awareness of what it means to be human, what is the second highest? Detective and thriller. What? Like detective is the second highest. So it to me, and then the fourth highest is gangster genre. So it's like, what? Like,
well, we gotta hear his argument. We gotta get to those chapters.
It's because of what it deals with. He's saying it's because it's what it deals with.
Yeah, like what it talks about thematically.
So like, why is he saying like? I'm just looking at this page right now. You're right. Second highest, he says, is detective and thriller, which he says is looking for truth and assigning guilt in spite of danger. So I can see that as a higher order kind of thing is take action. That's lower order. Be successful, take action. Whereas detectives and thriller deals with looking for truth, which he explicitly says that action is not dealing with things like justice. I remember when he said, like, we are not concerned with justice in action. Okay, it's a higher order kind of thing to be concerned with justice.
See, but I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay.
Because even like something like Indiana Jones or Raiders of the Lost Ark, which he cites several times in this chapter, I've analyzed that movie and I asked myself a long time ago, this is obviously an action film, and I love Raiders of the Lost Ark. Love it. And then one time while I was analyzing, I was like, okay, let's jump into Raiders. This seems to be pure action, like you said, not a higher meaning, not a moral focus on justice. And yet, absolutely it is. The title says Raiders of the Lost Ark. The moral question from a thematic point of view is, what do we do with these artifacts? These are human records buried in the earth that have intrinsic value to humanity. And one side answers that question with, we're going to raid them. We're going to take them for personal use. And Indiana Jones says, no, those belong in a museum, right? Those need to be preserved for all of us. So I'm just saying that there's still a justice question at the heart of the action. That's what's motivating Indiana Jones.
He is saying, though, that what he calls the transcendent action stories are the ones that are like at a higher level in terms of their morality. They will deal with issues like that more. They will ask questions about how to live well. They'll ask more questions about, like, I'm trying to remember how he words it. Being good as opposed to just being great. But it doesn't have to. Maybe that's the point. Because I'm thinking about John Wick, for example. I mean, does anyone think that him going and slaughtering all those people is like proportional to to
No.
like, no, it's just but it's a great action series.
But vengeance can
Yeah,
still be viewed as an ethical response, an appropriate ethical response in the face of no other options, right? That's kind of the view of revenge.
I completely
extreme,
feel
though.
where you're coming from, Doug. Because, and I feel like Truby skirts that the kinds of questions that you're asking there, Doug, because he will frequently put a movie in more than one category.
Yes.
So he doesn't give us, like, I feel like I want him to really articulate the purest form, and he.
Yeah.
Maybe he did this someplace, but in my read through, I didn't get, like, here is a story that articulates the purest form of this, and is only this. Whereas there are a lot of things I'm like, well, this could also be this, and it could also be this. And he talks a lot about blending genres.
Yeah,
and
in
things
his
like
defense,
this.
he thinks those are the best ones, though. So I don't know that he would use
Well,
an example of a pure one as a good example, because he thinks the best ones are going to be multiple genres.
Right.
Well,
so
okay, then fine. Then fine. No problem. Tell me, here is a terrible action story because it's only action. Like,
right. And then who cares?
Everything that is in action, and it does nothing else but action, and that's why it's bad. Okay, then
And then no one's going to watch
Maybe
it.
that's not the tone he wants to go for, though.
Okay, well, that's fine. No, but that's fine.
Be,
but
it
because
may not be
he
professional.
doesn't do that, sometimes I have the problem that Doug articulated, that because he doesn't give me the pure version of any one. He could give me a pure version and tell me, here's a pure action story, and it was terrible because it was only an action story.
Right. And then
I wanted him to do that. Yeah.
Right. So, like, even Terminator 1, there is an ethical issue. Does humanity have the right to live? It created AI. AI decided no.
Mm-hmm.
The alternative view is you do not have a right to live. You're a threat to the earth, to whatever. And she's like, no, we're worth fighting for. And the second one, the Terminator learns the value of human life. Remember, don't kill anybody. So you have this huge action sequence, and yet killing is wrong, even for a Terminator.
Yeah, but he does say that he thinks the good action stories will ask those moral questions.
Well, I think what Heath is saying, though, is if that's true,
mm-hmm.
then the standalone genre is inferior and less worthy of discussion because in its pure form, it doesn't transcend. It just exists in this smaller space.
So please give me that example.
Right.
Yeah, because like we even like on this channel, we discussed Terminator 1 as a horror film.
Yes.
A lot.
And it is.
Yeah, but he does not say that. Truby says that that Terminator 1 is an action film. And when Doug and I discussed it, we discussed it as a horror story a lot. So yeah, I want to know more about that and why, because he just writes down films. For actions, films, Die Hard, Mad Max 1 through 4, Terminator 1 to 2. But like in Terminator 1 to 2, we've discussed quite a bit the turn from Terminator 1 to 2 from the horror genre to the action genre. But he doesn't give me any explanation as to why. I mean, we could be completely wrong. I'm completely open to the fact that I could be wrong. Maybe Terminator 1 is not a horror movie. Maybe I'm completely wrong about it.
Probably both.
But he doesn't give me any argument as to why I'm wrong. He just writes this down.
Right.
And
so that's my main frustration with
if I'm wrong about Terminator 1 not being a horror movie, it's actually an action movie, then I need some explanation about that.
Right. Well, and I'll say this about Mr. Truby. I sense that I'm reading the words and the thoughts and the mind and walking through the mind of someone who's got a lot to say. So I sense that. And you know the difference for a lot of us here, especially in the chat and on the show, we're all readers. You know when you're basking in the high intelligence of an author. You know it. You feel it. Mm-hmm. There's something profound going on in these pages. And I sense that here. But what I am upset with is I feel like he breezes through some of this. And I'm like, whoa. I have like a question about that. And then we're on the next thing. And then there's another header. And then there's another header.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah, that's my biggest frustration with the book. Like, there's so many times in the margins where I'm like, he just stated this and didn't give an argument. Like, how am I supposed to accept this? Like, you know.
And then he'll use his own terminology, which you're supposed to do.
Right.
I do it, you know, in the Heroine's Light. You build out a world of language and a lens to understand something. But there's times where I'm like, man, he's assuming I have a full grasp of this, and I'm not sure I'm sold on it. So now he's asking me to, I don't know if I understand it. And now it's in this other part of this discussion where he's saying it's a higher idea. And I'm like, man, I guess I'm just going to have to ride this wave and see where it takes me, and then maybe come back to fully grasp some of this, because I feel like it just moves awfully fast. That's all.
Yeah. Which is, it's interesting because it is such a big book. And I do wonder if he had like a longer version of it or a draft that had to be trimmed down for reasons, you know, publisher preference.
You know, part of me would almost prefer that he wrote one book per genre and made it smaller and just released the library at 9 books or whatever it is, and just release them. I think if I mean, I get why he didn't, because this is
it could have been a publisher decision. You never know.
It could have been, but it also might. I could see why he wouldn't too. The case on why this is an overarching theory.
It might be only so long people are willing to listen, right? You can't publish 8 books. I'm trying to put a
We're getting
light
a Blair
book
project over there.
Yeah, I know. It looks like it does look like the Blair Heath project. When I'm doing this.
Blair Heath. Yeah, it's interesting. You guys have, so I'm very intrigued by the fact that you guys have criticisms of action, because my experience was with the horror chapter, I loved it, but then there are some parts that I really disagreed with. And then with action, it was all, I was like, oh, this is great. It was all very useful for me. And then with myth, it was the same thing as horror, where it was like, so there are parts that I loved, and then parts where I was like, oh, I don't agree. But it gave me pause, because I'm like, well, horror and myth are 2 genres I've spent a lot of time thinking about deeply. I have not done that with action, so I'm like, maybe there's problems with action that I just don't.
Well, you might be.
Well, so I was wondering about that. Yes.
My problem with action is I didn't feel like it told me anything.
That's interesting, because I found some use in some of it. But
okay, well, that's fantastic to go through.
So that was a key question that I had for you, Brianna, because or not, as we're thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
The ultimate thing, and I made this in my notes, where I was like, is this necessary? Like, is the question that I finally wrote down? I was like, well, is this useful? Is this helpful? If it is, then it has value. So if you're saying it was helpful to you, then it does have value. I might just be missing some of it. To me, I'm missing
something. I don't know.
I did find.
I'm the one missing something. We'll find out.
No. I don't think you're.
I found a few things in action interesting.
Sound thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, but I'll highlight those as I go. Because I did highlight stuff in action about stuff that was interesting about a moral framework. I mean, because that's the most interesting part of storytelling. You know, that what does this tell you from about your life and what you need to do? And I did find interesting things about the genre of action in this chapter about that. So I did find that.
Yeah, I had to talk on that.
I tell you what, Britt, do you want to just start with you want to lead the conversation on action? Just start the conversation on action and see where you go.
I'll just like give the broad overview. Of
actually, wait a minute. Brianna, actually, Sable just started with 10. Thank you very much for a $10 super chat. Sable says, I completely agree with you, Brianna. So before you even get started, you got back up, Brianna. I completely agree with you, Brianna. I think it's because Truby's philosophy worldview is built on certain assumptions. And that influences his descriptions, even if it doesn't quite apply correctly.
Yeah. You know what it seems like to me sometimes? A painting with a lot of strokes go like quick. And now, just so you know, that could be Van Gogh. You know, like, I don't know if you've ever seen a Van Gogh painting up close. I don't know if I've told this story, but it's stunning because I couldn't believe how sloppy it was, and I don't mean that this is not meant to diminish any of it. In fact, it has augmented it for me, because when you got right up close to it, you could see the canvas below. There's areas where you could see the texture of the canvas, and he didn't even cover it up, and it looks like cake frosting. It's just whipped on there, and the guy, by the brush strokes, you could see the madness in the creative desire to make this painting. And that to me was amazing. So sometimes when I'm reading this, it feels like I'm looking at those rapid brushstrokes and I haven't been able to pull out and look to see if it's a masterpiece yet.
Yeah, it might take reading the whole book before we get there.
And that's correct. That's true. We have not found his final conclusion nor his overarching thoughts on all of these other things. It may make perfect sense.
I want to say, BGD says, the perspective that an action movies, specifically the mandate that they explore an ethical dilemma, seems overly intellectualized. Action stories often serve as an artistic expression affirming the value of subjective human experience. That's the classical romantic ideal, part and parcel.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand.
They don't have to have them, but that he prefers that they do.
but I just want to articulate that oftentimes I do want to say, and this was the same last time with Truby as well, that when I was saying things on here, that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe them, but I was trying to make sure that I understand Truby's point. So I was really trying to make sure that I understand Truby's point. And so when BGD says that, I understand that if you see an action movie and you see stuff blowing up, like, is this really exploring some kind of ethical message? But according to Truby is saying that is right here in this book, that what you're saying is that 90% of success is taking action. We've been through horror. We're going to live. We've chosen to live or die. We've chosen to live. Okay, now how do you be successful? Take action. That is a very basic level. It's a very basic level.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what Truby is saying. It's not what I'm saying. It's what Truby is saying, as far as my understanding is, that now we've gotten to action, that, listen, you want to be successful in life? 90% of that is take some action. Don't lay around in your bed. Like, get up. Yeah, I mean, literally, that's the way I'm taking this. Don't lay around in bed. Don't wander around waiting for something to happen to you, waiting for something to come. Truby is saying that the action genre is telling us that 90% of success in life is taking action.
Well, it's like, so you decide to live, and then I decide to plant wheat, and I'm gonna create agriculture. Well, I'm gonna have to defend that now. Mm-hmm. Now that I've planted it, now that it's there, now that value has existed from my mind and nature, now someone else will be like, hey, I'm going to have some of that. And I'm going to be like, no, I did all the work. And now, I'm moved to action. I must.
But even the action is planting the wheat.
Yes.
What do I do? I'm alive.
I'm
going to plant some wheat.
Right. In terms of the meaning of action, which that was something that I thought was really interesting. It's like, why does the action genre exist? Because, like, what it is literally is it's warriors, it's people fighting in action stories. Or it could be sports, or it could be a caper, etc. But it's there's that kind of, it's usually combative in some way. But people watching it are not necessarily going to be doing those things in real life, but it's still meaningful to us because, like what Heath is saying, it's representative of just action in general. Like, I feel like if you get kind of pumped up by a good action story, it doesn't motivate you to go kill people. It motivates you to go, take care of that thing that you've been putting off. It's it's that kind of it feels the same way in real life, the sort of normal everyday experiences we have where we have to take control of our lives and do the things that we have to do. And that archetype of that action hero represents those sort of more fundamental things. I thought that was a really cool thing of, like, that's what it means. That's what we like about that kind of a story. Not that we're all going to be warriors, but that we're all going to take action and take control.
It's exciting to watch a character, an individual, commit themselves to a course of action. Like, remember the first time you saw Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indy is crawling under the truck, and I'm like, what is this guy thinking? This guy's crazy. And he's winning. He's successful, which is a big thing that Truby points out. It's not just that. And so Heath, you're a very productive guy. And by the way, I'm a very productive guy too. And I have a problem. There's a dilemma in being productive. If I choose a path without thinking it through sometimes, I will cross the football field before I realize maybe this wasn't a good idea. Mm-hmm. So for me, I have to be very careful. So, and why is that important? Because it's one thing to be active and to commit to a course of action. It's another thing for that action to be meaningful and important and useful to you. Because if you're just doing action in the wrong direction, there's a lesson there for you because you just wasted your time.
Well,
and
no,
I have done this.
Yeah, no, and Truby does talk about that. And
Yes.
I think, and because I was writing notes on that as we go, and I'm about to turn it over to Brianna, but that action,
Yes.
just action alone isn't enough.
Correct.
It needs to be action in the correct direction, and it needs to be the correct action. And he does mention something about that. I'm sure we'll get to it because I did
Seeing that flame is stressing me out.
I'm sorry.
Are you on fire, Heath?
It's the sacred fire.
Well, am I on
Sacred
fire?
fire
No,
is just.
no. I did turn up the lamp in order to read my book here.
I'm just like, oh my God, there's fire. Sorry, I got.
Do you know what word I
but-
wrote in my notes about 50 times, and he never uses this word, and it bothered me because I feel like it's absolutely important in this chapter. Competency. It's not just successful action. You are becoming competent at something, whether it is escaping, whether it's an athletic ability, whether if you're going to save somebody, you're not going to do it by accident. Like Indiana Jones isn't saving people because, or rescuing an artifact because he's sloppy and accidental. He's very cunning at what he does, and he's proven the success is the byproduct of competent action. And so to me, competency was the key. And to commit to action is to commit to competency, because anyone who's good at anything got there, and they'll tell you how long it took to get there. And then that person is in a good position to commit to a lot of action that to us will look very successful and enviable. We'll be like, wow, look at this person. This person's amazing. But it took a lot to get there.
I think you're right, Doug. You're right. He may never say that word, but he does have action story beat. An action story beat is training.
Yeah.
Yes.
He does talk
I
about
think
training.
that's where I wrote it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where you wrote that. He does have training here.
Yeah,
All
the
right,
word competency came up when in the first time I think it was you and me, Doug, Doug, or when we were talking about the Heron's Labyrinth, and then we went into the difference between a feminine hero and a masculine hero, and that was one of the things that we had established, is that this sort of archetypal masculine hero is going after competency. That's very important.
Tends to, right.
Yeah, I just wanted to harken back to that previous conversation.
Well, and he is very clear, drawing what appears to be strong masculine focused language on the action genre, and the action hero or the action character tends to be male. And I was like, well, maybe in past story, I think that'll change over time. Women obviously care about competency.
Oh, I got a lot of notes on that too. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But in older stories, that seemed to be a trait in a lot of what I would call hero's journey stories, is the hero pursues some form of competency. And BGD said was Hamlet. I don't know if Hamlet is an action story, but at some point, like if you're gonna commit yourself to a course of action, you should have a reasonable chance of success. Now, that doesn't define all action. In fact, in my own studies with heroines, the Shield Maiden, she is not always competent in combat, but she commits nonetheless and often succeeds. She draws that line. And I think of that red line as almost like a mental shock to the person who is now wondering, am I going to cross this line? So there are different forms of action, but he goes into John Truby goes into great length describing successful action. And I thought that missed the point a little bit. I think that competency in action genres is the source of that success. Anyway, that was a long-winded way to get there.
Well, all right. Take it away, Brianna. Okay. Go for it. Take it away.
Yeah, so I, just to organize my notes real quick, what I did was I have, in each chapter, I have notes. And so we can go through that in order, and you guys we can talk about your notes in order if that works for you too. And I also for the beats, just like I did with fourth horror, I wrote down each of the beats and summarized them in my own notebook, just because I felt like it was helpful for me to kind of organize it that way. So I want to talk about each beat in and then also notes about it. So does that sound good? Does that sound like a good way to go through it?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, let me open up my book.
I'm looking at mine too. That's why
Yeah.
I got to be able to read my notes,
all
and my
sorts of
highlights
notes in
and things
there.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I like about this book is how he's been going through the type of hero that we have in each genre. And comparing action to horror is interesting because it seems like it's different in very fundamental ways. So in horror, we established that the hero was a victim, that they are in that genre, the not just antagonist, but whatever the enemy. What am I looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? The broadest word.
Villain.
Villain.
Antagonist.
That's what I'm looking for. The opponent is going to be more powerful than, like, way more powerful. Whereas in action, our primary hero type is the fighter. And I think he was saying, if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong about this, guys, but I think he was saying that you're going to have more evenly matched hero and opponent. So that was an interesting place to start. And that also, of course, it's about success. We already talked about that. About action is about fighting all the way to success.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's what he says. Success, he says right here, according to this philosophy, trying to understand his philosophy, success in life comes from simply taking action. And that's what the ethical framework of the action genre is, telling you if you want to be successful,
at least you got to start there.
you can't just, okay, you're going to live, but don't just lay in your bed. Take some action. Plant that wheat.
And then the other thing that I thought was interesting was talking about the goal of an action hero. So in horror, it's survival, right? Or avoiding hell. Here, it's freedom. So I'm curious to know what you guys thought about this one. So I'll just quote a few things. He says, freedom is the ability to take action when and where one chooses, which is an interesting definition. It seems to track.
I highlighted that too.
So he says, therefore, there seems to be a one-to-one equivalent between action and freedom. You create freedom by taking successful action. And so, as we'll get into later, like that can be sometimes the action hero dies, right, and still wins because they died free.
But that's paradoxical.
Well, it's not, and that's a different goal in horror, but in action, it's like, are you free to be yourself, or you're not being constrained, you're not being enslaved, and that's something worth fighting for, even if it means that your physical body dies.
Well,
so I think a great example of that is Gladiator. Like we all feel that Gladiator, that character won on a deeper sense, but he doesn't survive in the end. So that's very different from.
Well, Braveheart is another one.
Yeah, Braveheart. Another one is Sin City. I haven't watched the movie, but I read the graphic novel.
Oh yeah.
I'll talk about that again. But that's another one where it's like that character, you felt like he won, but he dies.
Yeah, well, even in the Braveheart speech, he's like, would you rather be an old person years from now in your bed? What would you give for one chance to come here now to tell the English to go stick it? And they're like, yeah. So he was like, would you rather die for freedom or live enslaved? That was the deal.
Example.
And they said we would rather die for freedom than to live enslaved and make it to old age where we're safe.
The reason that I said this was paradoxical is because of what you were reading here, because he says that freedom is the ability to take action.
Death is
but
not.
that you create freedom by taking successful action. So freedom is the ability to take action. If I'm free, that I can take action. Okay, great. But how do I get freedom? I get freedom by taking successful action. So freedom is my ability to take action.
Well, it could be that there's one last act you're able to make that is a free act, and that is
it could be
an action that's valuable enough that's worth fighting for.
That's fine. That's the Braveheart thing. That's the Braveheart thing. That's the sacrifice. That's Braveheart. But that doesn't make it inherently, or at least if you don't want to say paradoxical, let's say circular. That he's saying that freedom is the ability to take action. How do you get freedom? You create freedom by taking successful
Well,
action.
I have a thought on
That's
that.
circular. That's
I have a thought on
say
how that
circular.
makes sense.
That's circular.
Well, it could be, but you can also look at it from the point of view of I have to act to do something free. That act is going to cause impetus, and now I have to act again. So the action creates a trajectory that you have to continue in order to stay free. I don't think that's what I was thinking he was saying, is that this act, the first act, is what starts the trajectory, and now you can't just stop midway through, because then it rolls all the way back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think another way to put it is that freedom is like not being constrained. You know, like if you're being pushed in and closed in, you know, and you can't move, then obviously you're not free. But that sometimes that what's actually stopping you from moving, it isn't necessarily that you are literally completely constrained, but just that there's going to be a cost if you move. You know, like you move, you break these chains, there's going to be a cost that makes you free. And if you value freedom more than you value your own physical well-being or whatever it is, then that it becomes worth it. So
well, and I would like to add, action has consequences, and death is always going to be on the table. That's part of why these stories are compelling. In a horror story, the character commits to survival. They may not make it, but
they survive at all costs, and then action is freedom at all costs.
And Sable has a great distinction there. So it's a different motive for what the character is, what is driving that character, and death might happen anyway. They may not make it. That's the tragic side of it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that because we are mortal, because we can die, that's why someone who commits to escalating action or commits to survival is so compelling, because you're like, oh, like it's all on the table with this guy or this heroine or the hero. It's all on the table. That shark's going to get him if they don't solve this. You know, like, this is terrible. They've committed to this course of action, you know, or the Terminator is right behind them. They can't quit now, you know, or in an action story, you know, is Indiana Jones going to give up because he fell off? You know, the guy threw him out the window of the truck. No, this dude's going to travel the bottom of the truck and get her. He's got another card to play through action. So death is always a part of the equation, I think. I don't think that nullifies it necessarily.
So Sable had said horror is about overcoming fear. Action is about overcoming control.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I think it is. Or at least refusing to give in to them.
Mm-hmm.
If it cost your life, ultimately.
Yeah, I like that, Sable.
This is the art, because it says here, the art of success, freedom as the end point when we're talking about the action genre. And also up here, I would say that that he said the main distinction of the action genre is that life is about doing well, not about doing good. It's about being successful, not morally right. So he's saying when we're evaluating the action genre, we're not trying to evaluate morality. Was the hero moral? We're trying to evaluate, were they successful, and that through action you can become successful. Later down the road, during Maslow's hierarchy of stories, we'll assess morality. But right now we're not assessing that.
Or maybe, to be fair, we'll assess it more directly. Like, I think, like, you know, clearly action can deal with morality, but that's maybe not the focus. That's not like the primary, you know, that's not at the forefront, where there are definitely other genres. Like, I think about, like, you know, gangster or crime, you know, like that's more about, you know, there's a darker side of human nature, and like what the right course of action is a little bit different.
I'm seeing that as a weakness of this book, because yes, if you blend them together, then you can deal with both. But he's telling me that action as a genre is not concerned with justice.
Or not primarily. I feel like that's probably.
No, I don't know. I don't know. He does not say that. He doesn't say.
Yes, he does, because he later talks about how.
Like, here's the sentence. It's not about being successful. Excuse me. Let me replay. Here's the sentence. It's about being successful, not morally right. He doesn't say it's mainly about being successful, but also kind of about being morally.
You have to read the
very black and white here. if you're talking about action, it's about being successful. Go ahead.
You have to read the chapter in its whole context, though, because then you're talking about like on page 86, where he's talking about sort of the potential weakness of action, which is where you're you're trapped in that the shame culture, as he describes it, of focusing on doing well as opposed to doing good. But then so let me just read this quote. He says, the use of violence is justified in the action story because of a dangerous world.
Wait, where are you? Can you give me that quote? Can you give me the
86,
page?
86. 86. Which is jumping ahead. We'll come back to where we were a second ago. But so he says, the use of violence is justified in the action story because of a dangerous world or an opponent who uses violence to subjugate others. But in better action stories, this tendency is an inherent flaw in the hero. Violence is his first response. It represents stunted growth where the individual's approach to the problem is simply to destroy. And so then he goes on and talks about how, like, this is going to be more later in the chapter, but he talks about how in this kind of action story, there may be a self-revelation at the end where there is like a sort of a more reflection on who the character then becomes. So I don't agree with you that he's saying that there's never this kind of a moral reflection in the action genre. I think this is me trying to understand his perspective, because I do agree with you that the way he's wording it is inconsistent. But I think in the full context, what he's saying is that a lot of action stories don't deal with that, or they don't necessarily have to, but that the ones that are more memorable, the ones that really resonate with people more, do deal with it.
But then that means that action is inherently a weak genre because it can't become great on its own. And what I would say is that,
why not? Because he's not saying there that you're bringing in other genres. He's just saying that that's a better version of that genre.
Well,
he's saying that
I don't know of any genre that doesn't have a moral fixture on the action. To me, if I see a character swinging on vines and leaping on a thing, within about a minute, if I don't know what he's doing or why, that's meaning, it's gibberish. It's action for the sake of action. The action only means something when it does have a moral trajectory to it. Why is this character doing this? Once I understand that, I can identify with him. If he's just climbing and jumping and going from one plane to the other, I'll turn on Chive. I'll watch YouTube. Not even then, those guys have something.
Is it necessarily that there is a moral imperative, or that there is a goal? Right, like you have a character that's doing these things because they have some specific goal they're going after.
But
right?
I think even to have a goal is to have a moral center somewhere. I don't know how. Like if my goal is to plant wheat, well, it's going to be so I could feed myself. It's also going to be so that I don't have to hunt. Like there's a lot of reasons why I would have that as a goal, and there's usually something ethical in that's driving the motivation. And I think we, as writers, as people, when you lose focus on why you're doing something, it becomes very hard to do it. So to me, I don't know how you could separate action from that sort of that motivating force behind the character.
Yeah. Okay. Look, may I say here? Okay. It may also be possible that Truby is just a terrible writer and he can't express his thoughts. Okay, that's also very possible. Because when he writes, the main distinction of the action form is that life is about doing well, not doing good. It's about doing successful, it's about being successful, not being morally right. He expressed that as an absolutist sentence. And maybe he did not mean that as an absolutist sentence. Maybe he should not have written it that way because, as Brianna said, maybe if you read more of his chapter, you realize that he contradicts himself and didn't mean that as an absolutist thing. That's completely possible because I'm trying to understand his thought process. But
I think you're both right on that
absolutist sentence. Okay, so now Brianna says you've got to understand that even though he says that absolutely as a declarative sentence that is what the action genre is, he contradicts himself elsewhere, as Brianna was pointing out, because he says the use of violence is justified in the action story because it's a dangerous world or an opponent who uses violence to subjugate others. That seems to go well. But in better action stories, how do we adjudicate better action stories? He's given us all of this framework for adjudicating transcendent. Instead of better, did he mean the word transcendent? Should his editor have said, instead of in better action stories, should he have said in transcendent action stories? Is that what he's trying to communicate? I don't understand. Let's try to read it in that framework. In transcendent action stories, this tendency is inherently a flaw of the hero. Does that make more sense? He did not say transcendent action stories have that. He said better, the best action stories. And so how do I do that? If I'm trying to understand the action genre, then give me the best genre. He says, in one hand, it's absolute. Doing good, it's about doing well, not doing good. It's about being successful, not being morally right. But in the best of the stories, this tendency is a flaw. What does that even mean? I don't understand. That's why I don't like this chapter. What does that even mean? Did he mean transcendent there?
Well, and I think Brianna, and Brianna, you speak for yourself. I'm trying to understand your position. I think your position is that action for the sake of action on the hierarchy still has a place there in the hierarchy. Is that what you're saying? And then
I would
to
say
add these other things is to muddy that up a little bit. Even if
I still feel like you can have, and here's the thing, I can't actually think of an example all the time.
I was going to say, if you
can
be
wrong, but it seems to me intuitively like it's possible to have a really fun, satisfying action story that is not very deeply dealing with the morality. I mean, I honestly do feel like John Wick is like that. It's not that there's no moral element.
The puppy, he killed a puppy.
Yeah, but what we're enjoying about that story, what we're enjoying about that story is seeing all these people get their comeuppance. It's like just seeing him be successful and seeing him be competent killing people. Like that's like the fundamental thing that's fun about that. It's not sitting there and like being super self-reflective about it. And I think if it did, we wouldn't like that. We'd be like,
however, but
that's not what this is
here's
about.
the thing. I think you're partially right there. However, the initial morality it wasn't just the dog. The dog is the famous reason, but it was also the girlfriend. She died. You know, the puppy was what she gave him.
It was like the world just gave him too much, and he was like, "I'm fighting back."
But
the world. Yeah,
that would not last long if it weren't for the Continental and the ethical system of assassins that was established by the Continental. Once you add the rules and say something like, here's the best killers in the world, but no killing. Now we're like, oh, this just got crazier. This is nuts. You know, an order of assassins with rules. So there's still an ethical framework, or else these assassins would not have rules. And when you break the rules, there's consequences. You know, they enforce against you and all that. So I still think that the action, in order to have meaning, still is tied to something meaningful. And, you know, Drudenfuzz said something, and I came to this conclusion myself because of a really low time in my life. Like I said, I'm very productive. I get a lot of stuff done in a very short period of time. And I had failed very extremely at some point. And I got to the weirdest point in my life because I was like, I don't want to, what do I do now? Because if I do anything and it always falls apart on me, but always falls apart, then to start again is a meaningless act. It's meaningless to me. There's something I'm doing wrong. So I had to find a reason to re-engage. I had to figure that out. Once I did, I did a lot, but I could not make action make sense without that purpose behind it. There had to be something behind it. And John Wick even is sustained by his love of his wife who passed away, which was personified by the dog, which was murder, which was sustained by the ethical premise of the Assassin's Creed, which said you can't enact vengeance to a limitless extent. So anyway, I have a problem separating those. I don't know a story that can really separate those, that I would be invested in, or anyone would relate to the character.
Mm-hmm.
And I could be wrong, by the way. I could be wrong. That I just have a sense that those two things are hard to separate the way he has separated them, or suggest that they should be separated.
Anything else on that note, Heath? I was going to jump back to the.
No, go ahead. I didn't mean to be. This chapter frustrated me for the reasons that I was expressing here. Yeah. That I feel like that it is self-contradictory.
Those kinds of things frustrate you, I've noticed.
and those things frustrate me, right? Yeah. Yes. So because I really am trying to understand his philosophy. And when these things are self-contradictory, that it seems like that I'm reading, it does aggravate me. Sable says transcendent. So transcendence, when he's talking about transcendence, when Truby is talking about transcendence, transcendent in the context of transcending genre by combining more than one, like he says in the intro. No, I know that's what transcendent is, what he's talking about. I was wondering if he meant transcendent by better. Like, I'm wondering.
No,
I don't know.
He knows that you know that. He's just setting up his second half of his statement.
So could mean that basic uncombined action fits the declarative statement, but is a worse story. It could be,
but then it's not really a genre.
Could absolutely be, but then that could absolutely be. But then I want Truby, like Doug said earlier, to give me the example of the quintessential action story. Here it
without
is.
Transcendence.
No, without transcendence, right? Here is the action story, and notice how it's terrible. Like, because
I don't know how professional that would be, though, to say in a book. Here's this thing.
No, absolutely, not at all. Lord, if you like, people talk about the epic. He's talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh or whatever. Like, he could definitely come up with. Did you notice the ancient, Assyrian epic of whatever? Man, that is an action genre. Like, nobody would care about that. Or like, he could come up with a 1910s. No, he could definitely come up with a story that somebody's going to feel personally attacked by. Like, did you read the certain book from 1472 by this particular Dutch poet? It is the quintessential action, and nobody cares about it. Why does nobody care about it? Because it was nothing but action. It did not transcend. No. You could absolutely have come up with an example of an action story. This is the quintessential action story that does not
show what he's talking about. Like, if he's going to say something like, here's an example of one where I'm trying to go back over, where he's describing the weakness. Like, he should have given an example of a story that had that weakness. Because I don't think he does. That's an example of something that he does a lot in the book, of just like asserting something and then not always showing that, showing how that is true.
He says, he's like, it, meaning action,
mm-hmm.
values emphasizes physical ability, self-reliance, independence, the pioneering spirit, courage, pride, glory, and doing well, as opposed to doing good. And I do not see those as being separated. I think all of those have to be tied to be doing to the character has to believe they're doing something good. I don't know. Otherwise, you're just building you're just stacking bricks to build a wall for the sake of building a wall. Like, if you're going to commit to action, you have to think this is worth it. And if it's worth it, why? Who benefits? And if someone benefits, now you're getting into ethics.
Yeah, that's a good critique. And maybe that is the critique that I didn't pick up on, because we've had a big critique of horror, and I'm going to have my critique of horror was that I don't think, like I said before, I don't think the fundamental thing is life or death. I think it's pain and pleasure.
And I get a sense that, Brianna, you're willing to overlook contradictions, not because you're not serious about it, but because you're trying to glean even if he is contradicting himself, he might have meant something important, and I feel like you're trying to still figure that part out.
Yeah, that's kind of the way that I read books in general. It's just that I always I engage with it, and I see what's useful, I see what I agree with, and if there's something I don't agree with, then I kind of articulate that, usually in the margins or here, discussing it with someone. And then if I don't like it, I just kind of move on, and I just go, and I just tend to. That's how I tend to read things. I'm like,
just to be fair, there's inherent value to that.
What's that?
To sifting through all of it, whether it's perfect or not, and finding something valuable in it, even if the author or the person did not convey it properly.
Yeah.
I guess I'm looking at it from the perspective that I don't even understand what he's trying to say, because I found it self-contradictory.
Well, I understand the idea that action supersedes survivalism. I get that.
No, I got that too. I got that too. Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Yeah.
We can probably let go of that part. Maybe we don't agree with it. Maybe whatever.
We're going to commit to the action of debate.
Okay.
So I want to say one more thing from the beginning. we were talking about how, well, let me just read this. The action genre introduces the phenomenon of freedom at its most basic level, personal freedom from external attack. If the horror form is about slavery from within, action is about slavery from without, mano a mano. So I think that's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's what I am enjoying the most about this book is the comparison. Like I really, I really enjoy categorizing things and comparing them. That's like one of the things my brain loves to do the most. So this book is scratching that itch about like, here's horror, here's myth, here's action. But what types of heroes or types of opponents do they have? What kind of story beat today that's different? Like what kind of themes do they deal with? Like that's very fun to think about, even if the particular intricacies of it I may sometimes disagree with, and some of you guys disagree with as well. I just find it to be such a fun exercise. Anyway, I'm ready to get into the beats. Do you guys want to get into the beats?
I just want to add one more thing about competency. And I knew I wrote it somewhere, and I found it on page 86 here. The idea of doing something well. He says doing something well or be successful action, which I equate to competency. And my other note was competency counts. Why? Why does it matter that a character is competent? If we're on a boat and Heath, you're in charge of sails and Brianna's on the rudder and one of us is incompetent, does that matter to the rest of us? Yes.
Oh, well, I thought you were going in a different direction than that. Go finish up, and I want to respond to that.
Okay. What I'm trying to say is being competent isn't just an extension of self-glorification. It also makes you dependable to the community, to the other people that are around you. So competency matters. How many action figures are going after their wife or daughter or, that daughter or that wife or that son cares deeply about how competent their dad is at that point. So to me, competency is not just some egotistical thing. It can be, obviously, but I don't think the end goal of competency is selfishness, which this chapter kind of emanates that attitude sometimes. I think competency makes someone dependable to others, to the community, to the village, to a profession. Competency is very important. So I just wanted to add that because I was looking for that note earlier and I just found it now.
I like that. You guys are adding a level of depth.
I thought you were going a different. I was going a different level, Doug. When like going back to when we were talking about Sleeping Beauty, and the prince, like the Disney Sleeping Beauty, and all the things the prince does, but actually the prince is incompetent. The prince is an incompetent person. And the only reason that he's able to do the things that he's able to do, like escape the castle is because of the magic of the fairies.
Yes.
So in this case, it's the competence of the fairies that allows him to do this. Is the prince a competent person? No. But is it important that the prince is going to be competent? Yes. It's important that eventually he's competent, because right now he's an incompetent prince. He's an incompetent dragon slayer, because he can only do those things by the magic of another person who happens to be magic.
The prince should have watched some movies about action.
The value of competence. Right. So does that matter? I would say yes. So I thought you were going like, if we're all on the boat and one person is incompetent, but then from an external power, they're magicked to be able to do their thing anyway. Does it matter in the moment? It might not matter in the moment because they're magic and is able to get the
result, right?
But it does matter in the long run that they are actually competent at what they are doing. So would you rather be competent at what you are, what you have to do, or would you rather be magicked the ability to complete this task? Well, if you're only focused on this particular task, it doesn't matter. I completed the task. I was competent at it. Or I completed the task because the magic fairies waved their magic wand and I got it done. But in the long run, over iterations, you want to be competent. You don't want to just be magicked successful.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead, Brianna.
All right. Let's get into the story beats. So I counted them, and there are a total of 16 that he identifies for the action genre. Or at least that not every single action story has all of them, but 16 that he identifies. So the first one is Heroes Defining Crisis. So there will be an opening scene that puts the hero in danger and shows who the character is. Of course, the most famous version of this is Indiana Jones. A couple interesting notes about this one. He says, crisis is the quickest and surest way to define a person. That kind of tracks. And the action story's crisis at the beginning, it defines the hero's fighting ability and his character, which is interesting. Character is a moral domain, is it not? It may have nothing to do with the main plot line, which is an interesting note because the only example I can think of where that happens, where it has absolutely nothing to do with the plot, is Raiders of the Lost Ark, which he gives as an example. And I was like, is he going to give another example? He did not. But yeah, any notes or reflections or thoughts on that first beat?
No, I didn't have much of a note there.
Yeah, I didn't have much notes.
All right, cool.
I did, Heath. I think you'll appreciate this. I circled his diagram for action, the down arrow.
I did that too. Okay.
He's gonna have something to say about that one.
Whoa.
Okay. Whoa. Okay. The diagram is down.
I've been looking all over for this to make it make sense. Now I get it.
Mind blown. That's funny. All right, so number 2, story world, enslavement from physical attack. So this I found interesting. So the story world is set up in such a way. First, I kind of read like my summary. The story world is set up in such a way to justify the hero's violence. Okay, so again, justify. Like you guys, this does. I do feel like I'm coming around to seeing that it is kind of inherently always going to be ethical. So the violent problems are going to necessitate violent solutions. So it's good. So action story, this may be obvious, but it's worth stating. You're dealing with physical danger. Like some genres, maybe social danger, blah, blah. No, in an action story, you are in physical danger. So there are 2 arenas that he describes as the potential enslavement. That can be the enclosure or the fortress or the chase. So the character may be kind of trapped in some sort of way physically, which is kind of similar to horror in that sense. Or there's some sort of a chase. I guess some stories can have both arenas. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say on that.
Yeah, he did give both, right? He gave both,
yeah. Shall I move on?
Sure.
All right, number 3. Here we go. The warrior's moral code. So this I really like. So courage and will to greatness. If horror is about the victim, then action is about the warrior. We already said this. And then the moral question is, will the warrior have the courage to stand and fight, even when the odds are stacked against him? It's not about winning and surviving necessarily. It's about achieving greatness, even at the cost of one's own life, or you could say achieving competency or whatever, as we said. I just want to read the paragraph he said about this because I really do like this. The key question the genre
this
asks,
is on page 84 if anyone's
yes. The key question the genre asks is this: does the fighter choose freedom or life? More precisely, does he stand and fight, or does he flee and fight another day when the odds are more in his favor? This question is always answered in the same way, however. According to the moral code of the action story and the Western, the hero may be alone, pistol in hand, facing 20 of the most heavily armed men in the world. No matter, he must always fight. That sort of encaptures, I think, what I enjoy with the horror. I mean, not with the horror, with the action genre, is that there is something there that just hits something primal for me. That whole like, odds are against me, but I'm not giving up. I'm doing it anyway. And it's about courage, having the courage to fight, even though there may be dire consequences. But that is the kind of attitude that you need a warrior to have, because if warriors are like, oh, odds are against us and we're out, then you could not ever have a successful, fighting force. So it's sort of like warrior culture or whatever, like, and romanticizing that, turning that into a story. I think that's cool.
Well, but then the first image I had in my head was Han Solo running through the Death Star, pursuing that platoon of stormtroopers. When they turn around and he's overwhelmed, he turns around and gets out of there. He totally runs away.
Well, there's a place for
He does
both,
shoot
right?
one.
I guess it has to do with whether or not it's worth it. Like, are you like?
Yeah.
It's not like you could always fight. Sometimes it's you're being a fool. But if it's something that's important, like especially if it's a matter of your own personal freedom or someone else's freedom or safety or whatever, it's like gonna fight in anyway. But if it's like, okay, I could maybe get away with not fighting right now because it's not important, you know.
Well, and Heath, I'm sure you could back this up easily, but even in military, there's retreat, which is forced upon you. You know, get out of here. But then there's withdrawal, you know, which is a strategic withdrawal, and it is a valuable tool that almost every major general uses at times. So sometimes you, like you said, you just choose not to fight, and it could be the winning strategy. Right. At some point, you'll have to make your stand, though. Yeah.
And then an action story specifically, like your final, we'll get to the final stand stuff later, but that there may be a kind of your climax may have that feeling of what is it that Captain America says? The whole world may be standing against you, and you tell them, no, you move, something like that. I can't remember.
Oh yeah.
That embodies that ethos. All right, number 4, weakness need. So again, he you know, this is anyone who's new. John Truby has these sort of 7 major beats that he asserts are in every story. I don't think I agree they're in every story. That's a whole other topic. But so weakness need is one of those. He has these 7, and each of these genres he kind of includes how those 7 apply to that genre, and then he adds additional beats. So this is weakness need. Is shame, culture, and will to violence. This was very thought-provoking for me. A warrior has specific archetypal flaws that are common. He is driven to excellence at the expense of everything else, including relationships. He struggles to overcome his extreme masculinity and blend with the feminine. Again, this is my just summary of it. I put in parentheses, I put archetype of beast from Beast's point of view. that question mark, that there's a sense of like the archetype of sort of like a too much masculinity kind of a thing. Like you need like someone who needs kind of that balancing force. And so that can be a weakness of this type of character, that's maybe what they have to learn, is some sort of balancing there. So he's talking about 2 different aspects of that. There's shame culture, which is falling short of the standards / expectations as a warrior. If you fall short, that leads to public feelings of shame. Also envy, competition, loss of status. So that's something that this type of a character is going to be afraid of. And then also that a flaw could be the will to violence, that sometimes you might take things too far. So that might be something the character has to learn. I wrote in all caps, the need is for the character to grow in other ways than personal success. So personal success is the obvious, plot line of what this character is going through, or competency. I like that word, Doug. But that if there's a character growth, that there's also going to be something else that is learned, that this character has to grow as a person in other ways as well. Any thoughts on any of that?
Well, I would say that I agree with you, Brianna, that this passage, by the time we got around to this particular story beat, this is what started to make this chapter more interesting to me. This was one of the more interesting parts of the chapter, like when it says the key point in the best. And again, we're talking about best. So he says best. In the best action stories the heroes need is to learn how to grow in other ways than personal success. Right. So now I still wonder. So that's very interesting to know. That still seems in contrast. So that was like the first time when I hit a contrast between what he had said previously, that this genre is about achieving success. It's not about justice. It's not about morality. It's taking action, and that brings success. But then when he started to talk about here, that says that in the best action stories, we're talking about how do you grow in other ways than personal success. I think that's very interesting, and that's why I started to pick up at this particular part in the story beat, but I still see that as contradictory to the message that he was trying to say about the action genre.
Right. Well, and maybe
as far as my understanding,
there's something Druden Fuzz just mentioned Truded Fuzz is making in the chat, making the case against competency. I would just say that competency does matter, but to Truded Fuzz's point, it isn't the only thing that matters. The action genre highlights the importance of competency in extreme situations. And it's fun. It's fun to watch a person competently. Like if you're watching a movie and the character accidentally, like Return of the Jedi, Han Solo, Boba Fett, and he turns and he hits it in the jetpack and he flies and he crashes. That was not competency. That was an accident.
Yeah.
If that's all they did, it would not be fun to watch. It would not be interesting. That was funny because it was contradictory to this highly competent person, Han Solo, who accidentally takes down Boba Fett.
Well, it was also contradictory to potentially have a highly competent Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Just, like, the highly competent Boba Fett, how does he go out? Oh, it was just like a bumbling accident that kills.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't even like that. But
right, I don't like it either. Right? Yeah, I don't like it either. But yeah, that's that. Do you want Han Solo to take out Boba Fett because Han Solo is a very capable individual, outmaneuvered Boba Fett and killed him?
Yeah, that would have been
that would be competence. Like, no, Han Solo doesn't take out Boba Fett because he's actually capable. He was just stumbling around blind, happened to accidentally hit a switch on his backpack, and Boba Fett died. So if you're anti-competency, then you would be for that. Like, I don't want to see competent people. I want to see blundering idiots. Okay, well, there we go. We got.
I think it was an attempt at humor that,
and he killed. Right. So yes, well, that's an excellent point.
There is a story that I could think of that highlights an incompetent hero who is valued for who he is, not for his competency, and that is Kung Fu Panda, which I love. I love Kung Fu Panda. He accidentally defeats almost everybody throughout the whole story. He's not very competent. He's very incompetent, in fact. But there is a who he is underneath message there. The secret to the Dragon Warrior was nothing because the secret is you. So there is a precedent for the anti-competency action hero. But I would just say that those are going to be few and far between.
No, I love what Sable just said. Really. Sable said, success or incompetence is comedy. That's why the defeat of Boba Fett in Return of the Jedi makes us laugh, because it's not something that, oh, you competently defeated Boba Fett. You incompetently defeated from him, and that's why we all laugh at it.
Right. I just want to add the caveat.
That's perfect. Right. Yeah. So
in Kung Fu Panda,
right. So if you don't.
Success through incompetency was comedy throughout the whole story, but the core message that who you are is cannot be given to you. That comes from within. That was a poignant part of that story. Still, that was not comedic. That message that the competency wasn't what defined Poe as the warrior. It was Poe himself. So there was a poignant message there, and that's just off the top of my head the only thing I could think of that. And I'm sure there's other stories, but that's one that goes against the competency focus.
So
now the other characters were very competent.
Yeah, so that is interesting. So yeah, I like that. Do you want competent people, or do you want success through competence in the story, or do you want success through incompetence? Because if you say I'm going to tell a story about success through incompetence, it's hard for me to at least immediately right now think about how that would not be comedy.
Well, and is this who you want to trust with your society or your job or the boat scenario? Like, competency matters to other people too. And, there is a value there to be competent in something. Of course, there's a dark side, pursuing hyper competency to the point where all relationship aspects fall off. Yeah. That's the dark side of it. But
I suppose in a story, if you're trying to say that, like, does it matter if you try to be good at things? And your message of the story is that it does not. That you're like, look at all these people who tried to learn how to be good at things, and then look at the person who succeeded. It was the blundering idiot who
Office Space.
Yeah, who happened to be successful, right? Yeah, that's it. So that's the message of that. Yeah,
But that's
yeah,
a comedy
because
as well.
imagine if you had characters that were actually successful, let's say summoning Cthulhu. You might have a very different genre than what Heath and I created.
Wait,
If they were actually
wait,
if
I'm
they were
sorry, what?
actually competent at being cultists, then it would not be comedy anymore. Oh God, I just lost my page.
No,
Hold on.
That's a good point.
Right? That's how I always pitch that to people. I
Well-
say we made a web series about a bunch of people trying to be Lovecraftian cultists, and they're very bad at it. That's how I tell it to people.
They're right. They're bad at it, but they're not. But they're bad at it, and they're not successful.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah, they still have to pay the consequence.
The Cultist web series does not. I would say the Cultist web series does not heroize or laud
No.
being incompetent.
No, I'm just saying it's incompetency for the sake of
It's
comedy.
incompetency. They're incompetency, and they also fail, and as a result, you get humor.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
that's
dumb
They're
and dumber.
competent and they're delusional. That those two things combined. 'Cause
And
we're going
delusion.
after things that
Right.
aren't possible.
I think that's a great point, Brianna, because we can say that if you are competent and you succeed, maybe you're talking about action. You're talking about something that you should look up to. You can be incompetent and succeed, and then you're probably talking about comedy. So that's, and in some points, and in some aspects of the storylines, the comedies that the cultist is, that's it. Ben is incompetent, and yet Steve still gets out of there.
That's true. They do succeed
So
in
Ben is
season 2. Spoiler alert.
Competent.
Yeah.
They succeed in removing Steve, hence it's funny.
Right.
But in
Do you have
other
one
cases, they are
competent
incompetent
cultist?
and they also fail, and it's still
No,
funny.
they succeed, but not because they're competent.
They succeed not because they're competent, right?
Yeah.
They succeed not because they're competent, right? Yeah. So that's successes do not come from their competence, and
and
hence it's
Sable-
a comedy. I think that's an excellent. I think it's excellent commentary.
And Sable, I would actually disagree with you. Ace Ventura is competent. He just pretends not to be. He's ridiculous. But do you see the way he parked that car? Like a glove? That's not an accident. That's pure skill right there, man. I like the
Man, it's been so long since I've seen that movie. I can't comment.
I have an interesting note in my margins that I just found, because we were talking earlier about how he doesn't give an example for a story that's an action story that doesn't deal with those moral issues. I have one, and it is in fact a popular story. A lot of people like this. I had issues with it, and that is Sin City. Even though it is a great example of the genre, it really bothered me. Something about that just didn't sit well with me. And at first I was like, I'm just probably not the intended audience for it. I think this is very specifically a very specific type of male fantasy that maybe I'm just not relating to. But of course, good stories should be relatable depending no matter who you are. So I don't know. But when I realized as I was reading this, I'll just read what I wrote. I said, this is what I didn't like about Sin City. The action hero's violent flaws were not adequately treated as flaws. You're supposed to root for this deranged sadist as he tortures people. It's messed up. It's not a better action story. Like it just, I always felt like the ending. I did kind of like how that story ended, but throughout the whole thing, I was not able to root for the character. I thought he was a terrible person. It just was like, I really struggled with that story. And I was like, but if it had dealt with that, if there had been some sort of self-reflection, I think it would have changed it for me. I would have felt more like, because he does, like he was saying in like the flaw of this type of character can be that they take things too far. Sin City, I think, is a great example of that. That character absolutely takes things too far. Like there's absolutely no need to do a lot of the violence he does. He does it because he wants to. He's being sadistic. And it's just hard to see that as heroic. But he is successful. So I feel like that's a story that maybe fits that. But again,
interesting. Well, that's
lots
a
of people
good
love that story. So I don't know.
Story there, and that's what we were looking for. Some proposed story that might fit that definition.
That one does for me. But I don't know. I'm going to watch the movie soon.
I haven't seen that for a long time. I should rewatch it. I remember gawking at the visuals.
You should read the graphic novel because the graphic novel.
I have. It's amazing.
It's fantastically executed. I want to come back and like study it, like, because at some point I want to write a graphic novel, and I am gonna, even though I had issues with the story of Sin City, I want to come back and like study it from an execution perspective, because the way it's a very well done graphic novel.
Totally amazing, and visually overwhelming. It was just beauty. It was like eye candy.
Yeah,
but you're right. Now that I think about it, I don't remember the story as much. So I must have been completely distracted by the visuals.
Yeah, it is. That is really the main selling point of that story, I think, is the visuals and the art. It's a very artistic story. It's really art form. But I think the story would have been improved if we had a little bit of reflection on the flaws of that character, and maybe even a little bit of change. It doesn't have to be a lot, but just like a little bit. That I think, but it still is fit into that, like someone who's making a stand, even though there's the great cost. And I think that's part of why it resonates. It has a good ending, but it could be just a little bit better. Okay. So he has under the same beat, he talks about, and here's why I was like, we gotta talk about these two chapters with Doug. The emergence of the female.
Okay, wait a minute. Let me make just one quick comment before we go to the female action hero, because yes, that's big, because that's the Doug. We got Doug here, so it's going to be
Doug, who is the expert on female.
You had jumped forward at this point. This is the point. This is at the point where he says the use of violence is justified in the action story because it's a dangerous world and our opponents use violence to subjugate others. But in better action stories, this tendency is an inherent flaw in the hero. I think at this point, and this is why I was having difficulty understanding Truby's perspective. I think at this point, as we're going through here, I would have understood his perspective better if he had not said better action stories, something like that, but he had said, this is why the action stories are incomplete, or this is why you cannot understand. Let me rephrase. This is why you cannot understand the ultimate human nature through action stories, because they're only about subjugating others. And in further stories, I'm not getting this completely right with my language, but as we go further, we will realize this is an inherent flaw. So I don't think I would have couched. So it's possible that I wouldn't have said that this is an inherent flaw of the action story, because this is what the action story is about, but that it is a flaw, or it is incorrect if you think that this is the be all end all in understanding the ultimate state of human nature, because we're only on step 2. Does that make any sense at all? He's saying that this is that he ends up reversing this and saying this is a flaw of action stories. I think he means to say this is, give me the pinnacle of action stories, where this is what he means to say. However, even though this is the pinnacle of action, it's not the pinnacle of human nature.
Yeah, maybe.
And hence we're going to go on to other things. Could that have been what he was trying to say?
Perhaps.
It could have been.
Yeah, maybe.
So I think, because I really am approaching this from trying to understand his philosophy before I critique it, because I'm not even sure that I have a critique of his philosophy, because I'm not sure that I understand his philosophy completely. But that could be what he was trying to say. Okay, so Sable at least says that maybe that was it. I don't know, so I'll take the support.
All right, Sable approves. You got it.
But that's because I don't like. I just want to say that I'm not going forward here on a critique of his story, because his philosophy, because I'm not sure I completely understand it. That could be what he's trying to say. But then, yes, from there, that's, if nobody has anything else to say on that, you're welcome to. But if not that, then you go into the emergence of the female action figure. Action hero.
Action figure.
Female action figure.
I feel like I should just read this paragraph, if that's fine.
Okay, go
I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read the first paragraph.
It's page 87?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we can talk about it. So he says, the action story has historically been the most male-dominated of all genres. Might be true. In the last 40 years, however, we have seen the rise of the female action hero. The mother of female action heroes is Ripley in Alien, followed by Sarah Connor in The Terminator. These two films are about the making of an action hero. And this sentence is what I thought was interesting. The lead characters begin as victims in what are essentially horror stories. They become true action heroes, driving the story in the second film of each series. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I also highlighted that sentence that you said was so influential on you. The lead characters begin as victims in what are essentially horror stories. Yeah. So I highlighted that too, because I was like, yeah, Doug and I talked about that.
Yeah.
But that, again, contradicts what he's written in here, because Doug and I were like, yeah, Terminator 1, that's a horror movie. But then he in here writes that's an action movie. But this sentence right here tends to imply that the analysis that Doug and I had put forward was correct, that it was a horror movie.
He's really inconsistent with his categorization.
That to me, that's what's keeping me from fully understanding his philosophy. And I think what is preventing this from really being something revolutionary is that his categories are so difficult to understand and self-contradictory that it's not presenting me something coherent.
I'm going to have a lot more critiques of the myth genre when it comes to that kind of a thing. So you'll hear me rant.
It's like it's like a lot of organization. It's almost like organizing M&Ms by color, and then at the end you're just eating the same thing. It's all chocolate. So yeah, sometimes I wasn't sure of the categorizing, Heath, like you're saying. It was like where I thought I understood it, and then he'll say it a different way, and he actually changes what he said. I'm like, oh, well then never mind. And then I'm like, well, now I don't know where I'm at, where with him and what he's saying. And maybe from what Brianna has been saying in some cases, maybe that doesn't matter as much as the core message that he's trying to drive through, which I think we're all trying to grasp. And to be fair, maybe it'll come into focus after reading the full book. We have to keep that open. We are making final judgments in some ways before having read the whole thing. So, but it matters, because if I don't understand, or if I'm not buying in chapter by chapter on some level, well, then that is a signal that there might be a problem.
At least in how it's presented.
Whether or not you keep
at least
going.
in how it's presented. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that, because actually when I said, of course, these terms are relative, so you have to understand the relativity. But when I read the action story historically been the most male dominated of all genre, I was like, my God, we've got Sarah Connor and Ripley. Like, these have been going back decades. So when you talk, and then he was like, oh, but in the last 40 years, he's considering that recent. Now that's perfectly okay. That's perfectly okay, because you can certainly say that the last 40 years of storytelling is recent. That's completely legitimate. But like, okay, the action story is the most male dominated of all genres.
Historically.
You go back to the he's saying you go back to the 1970s, 1960s, 1950s, 1920s, 2000 BC,
1800s.
Yeah. He's not talking about I would have contextualized that sentence for if I were writing that, because that was my response. That was like, oh my God, we've been telling stories with female heroes for decades. Oh, decades, and his response is recent, which is fine, which is perfectly fine. I want to say again, but I didn't understand the timeline he was talking about when he's writing here.
Yeah, historically, I mean, I feel like to me, if I see that word, I do assume that we're talking probably a long period of time. So maybe a difference in readers too. Any other?
Well, he has one statement he says on page 87 that also bothered me. He said, as the character driven to be, he's talking about the action protagonist. As the character driven to be the best, the action hero also wants to win the adulation of others. Glory is the opposite of shame, and the action hero is determined to get it.
Oh, we're going into the next story beat. I knew you were going to have comments on that one.
Yeah, I've read that now. I've read a lot of feminist literary criticism books, obviously, in order to even address the Heroine's Labyrinth. And a lot of feminist literary critics will talk like that. Well, they'll say like, the hero is overrated. He's just going for glory. And I've always underlined that. I'm like, I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of some of these heroes. I think glory is the byproduct of successful, competent action in which the hero does something that's not just good for himself. In fact, rarely just good for himself. It should be the hero does something that's good for the community. Han Solo was going to do something for himself, take the money and run. Instead, he engages in the battle, clears out the last TIE fighter for Luke, and Luke's able to sink the Death Star. So, and then he's rewarded. He gets the medal. So my whole thing was, I think sometimes people overrate the motivation of glory for heroes. I don't think heroes are genuinely driven by that. Some heroes, I'm sure that's the case. Wreck-It Ralph he just wanted the medal. He didn't want to earn it. He just wanted to go get the medal. So that's a case where you could say the hero was just seeking the byproduct of successful action without having done anything. But most action heroes have done something to earn that glory, and glory was rarely the motivating force.
Just real quick, I want to kind of frame that. So we moved into
Doug did go into another action beat with that. He went into desire, success, glory, and personal freedom.
So he's talking about
frame
desire.
that for us, Brianna.
Yeah. So desire, again, that's another one of his frequent things that he says in every story. So that's going to be success, glory, and personal freedom. So the warrior wants to be the best. They want glory. And here's the thing, what he's talking about glory, that's the opposite of shame. And they seek freedom over raw survival. So I think maybe the underlying point there, maybe if I understand, is simply that his idea of shame culture, where there's a sense of like, there's a standard you got to live up to. And if you don't live up to it, then that's shameful. But then the opposite of that is living up to that standard, achieving that success, and then what you get is glory. So you could, you're kind of a different way of wording the same thing potentially, where it's just like, even if that's not the direct goal, like you're saying, Doug, that is still part of what the hero is going after, going away from shame towards glory, towards freedom, especially, but then, all the things that come with that. I think that's kind of like in a bucket together.
Well, see, I think that those are more of a public response to you. And the reason I say that is, like, when I was reading the Scarlet Letter, I was like, what's the problem with this heroine? Well, she's been stigmatized. She's been shamed. And it's not, the Scarlet Letter is not something she gave herself. This is something that like he's saying, the opposite of the medal. The society plants that on her and says, you are bad. You've done something bad that we disapprove of. Whereas a medal is the opposite. You've done something we approve of, and we're showing you this glorious moment. We'll build a statue of you right here. So I think that shame and glory may actually be polar opposites, the way he's defining it. My point is that this is really a societal reaction to you, to the heroine or the hero and what they did. And shame is one public reaction, boo, hiss. And glory is the opposite. We love you. You're the best. Tinker tape. So I think of it more as a public response, independent of what you did.
If to be fair, though, wouldn't you say that if you were that type of a hero, that would be that, even if that's not like what you're saying, this is what my specific goal is. My specific goal is to, defend my tribe or whatever it is. But that what you're hoping for is to have the, adulation, is to have the positive responses and not the shame. That even if that's not the primary, that's not like your specific goal, that may still be a desire.
Well,
and
I think it's human nature to prefer positive responses over negative. Right. Social media has proven that.
I'm just saying in the context of this type of hero.
Well, what I'm trying to say is I don't think that the action hero is any different than anyone else in that framework that you highlighted. I think, they would prefer, and I would say one of his subgenres, the sports show or the sports story is a little bit more like that. I don't think an athlete is unaware that they could get the MVP, or maybe they'll win the game. Maybe they'll get some sort of act. They'll break a record. I feel like sports characters may be more conscious of external accolades because they're statistically baked into the game. But I think action heroes generally do it for other reasons.
It's not
the
even that that's the
positive
reason, just that that's something that they want. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think they would want it, but that's not the motivating force. That's my interest. And it depends. Just to be fair, it depends on the character. Indiana Jones does say in Temple of Doom, fortune and glory, fortune and glory, which makes it sound like that is his goal. So it depends on the character. It depends on the circumstance. But I do think that something else besides that is much more convincing motivation for action, for extreme action like that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm trying to defend him, I suppose, a devil's advocate or whatever. I think that because he's mentioning multiple things, so it's possible that you can have that these different things can be different kinds of desire. Like one might be a pie chart of what the hero one might be a hope. You know what I'm saying? Like you're moving away from shame towards glory. Again, I agree with you. I don't think that's like what the hero is on the front of their mind thinking about, but that is what they're moving towards.
Well, let me tie it into something I said earlier. Why would the village throw a medal over the neck of the hero?
No,
because he's competent. He's done something worthy of their approval, so I feel like they want to reward him. And maybe he wants to be rewarded by them, but I still feel that glory is an external force being pushed toward him. Maybe that's on his mind when he's doing these things. But again, if so, then he must have earned it through extraordinary effort or skill or competency.
I completely agree with you, Doug. I want to back you up there. That's what people were talking about. That and even Druden Fuzz was talking about, I think male heroes are trying to prove their value since they're biologically expendable, even in that case. But it's not talking about, because you talked about even the character in the story who wanted the medal, and that's a comedic thing. Yeah. What do I want? I just want the medal. So, what do I want to have the medal in my room?
That's a subversion.
You talked about that on other streams as well. That's like, particular critiques of the hero's journey that like, what do you want? A medal? Like, is that what the end of that is? But that you're right that other stories critique that as a comedy, that if you just want the medal, like that, if you're just looking for the medal, that's a comedic story that you're telling. That the medal is something that comes later, that is a recognition of something that you already did. So it's not about the achievement of the medal or the trophy or something. It's about doing something, and then society recognizes you through that trophy. So if you're like, man, I just really want to have that trophy on my wall, you're a comedic figure.
Well,
you're not a heroic figure.
Correct. So Wreck-It Ralph is a great example, right? Wreck-It Ralph says, I want the medal. I want social proof that I am worthy, right? So he goes and invades another thing. He gets the medal and then gets sent off to Vanellope's arcade. And by the way, Wreck-It Ralph is a picture-perfect example of Ralph on a hero's journey and Vanellope in a heroine's labyrinth. Her conflicts are at home. He leaves his native culture to go pursue this other thing. It's beautiful. It's actually one of the best examples. Anyway, at the end of that story, though, what does Ralph care about more than that medal? He holds that cookie medal that Vanellope made him that said, "You're my hero." An external thing that was given to him, which he viewed as better social proof of his worth, because he earned this one. And in fact, Ralph's about to off himself. He's self-sacrificing in that final scene. So the hero, I think Druden Fuzz mentioned that the males are biologically expendable. Well, maybe. And if that's so, obviously that's something that we don't like. I wouldn't like that if my society treated me that way. When the Titanic was sinking, it's like women and children first, not me.
Wow, society done that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that and we've talked about this, Heath, that the male hero, not the male hero, but I would say the masculine-oriented hero does care about that sense of expendability. And when he is given a medal, the society is saying, you're not expendable. You're valuable to us. and we're going to acknowledge that about you, and that matters, I think, to a hero.
Yeah.
So,
I think so.
so anyway, I'm just saying the hero, the glory is an external thing that is pushed on the hero, to me, more so than a genuine motivating force to all heroes, to the actions hero. I think that's a more of a byproduct.
So one other note on this, we were laughing about this earlier. We have the action story is the most linear of all forms, according to him. The action hero is always fighting to get the goal. And then he says, while horror stories sell maximum pressure on the hero, the action story is about speed.
I mean, I thought all of this was not very useful. Like this point, like because we were laughing about the linear, the drawing of an arrow and stuff like that. I thought this was because after we'd had some elements of the action part of this that I thought were useful that we had just talked about previously. By the time we got to linear plot, and that just means that the hero is in a constant win. I thought that was kind of useless.
Well, the point of that again is for comparison. The point of that is to compare it and to contrast it to other genres.
Okay.
Right. He's saying it's the most linear of all forms. If he was just writing a story about how to write action, he would probably not include that detail, I would assume.
Okay. Maybe so. Because if you're like, I want to write an action movie. Okay. Well, this is the most linear of all things. You start here and you go straight there.
Yeah, no, because again, this book is not just written for writers. It's also it's kind of it's not scholarly either, but it's kind of like it's a theory. He's got his own his theory that he's developing. So there's like a level of like, it's not media criticism, but what would you call that? Like, it's about storytelling. It's not just about how there is some how-tos in here, but I feel like that's another thing I feel with his other book. It's not really written like a how-to. It's kind of like here's some things I observe about stories. And then some of it has how-to takeaways, but so not all of it is necessarily, I think, for that purpose. Yeah. I don't think he's a storyteller himself. So sometimes people that aren't storytellers write in a slightly different way than storytellers do when they're talking about stories. But
that's not to say that they don't have a valuable observation from the outside. No, of course. Right. You know, I've heard people that aren't great writers, or not writers at all, actually, make some incredible observations on stories.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, I'll say this and then I'll drink my water. All right. So the next action, some of these next ones I think are probably going to be easy and quick to talk about. So number 6, collecting the allies. Sometimes the hero has to put together a group of all-stars to pursue the goal together. Yep. That seems true. Sometimes that happens.
I call those heroic partners.
Heroic partners like that. And then he has opposition. So number 7, opposition, external bondage. So the horror victim faces the prison of her own mind. The action hero faces a physical external prison of some sort. So we've already covered that. But then importantly, the opponent is someone strong that he must actually fight. For additional plot complexity, you can use the 4-point opposition. So he's talking about how instead of just having, because he's saying this is something that this is kind of a how-to, a problem that you can run into when you're writing action is because it is fundamentally such a simple linear kind of story that you might just have, you keep kind of hitting the same beats over and over again. Like, okay, we're going to fight this battle and then fight this battle and fight this battle. That instead, to add complexity, one thing you can do is have, the opponents that take different forms. So you have sort of sub-opponents. You have, the different, there's the big bad guy, and then he's got some, bad guys that serve him. And so the hero has to face different ones, and that there'd be different challenges related to that. So that was a useful.
I had to star one comment that I laughed, and I was like, is this really helping?
Well, I know. Mabel was saying this it was helping, and I was like, is this really helping? I mean, I'm just wondering here.
I thought the 4-point thing was helpful.
It was helpful.
I wrote, I was like, this is interesting. I could kind of see this being functional, and it's something that I could consider were I writing a story, which I am. Could I make a diagram like this and fill in my characters and see that all 3 are in opposition, or design it that way? So yes, it's something I could do. It's something that could be useful. And he gives us visuals. So he gives us a roadmap here.
And I will say what he's
But
doing
the
here.
visuals are all the same.
But he's showing different examples. But he's building upon his previous book. So if you're interested in the 4-point opposition thing, he talks about that in more depth in his other book. So just a note on that, because he doesn't really say much about it.
Okay, so for those who are looking, here are the diagrams. Or for those who are looking, let me see if I can. Okay, so here are the diagrams that people are talking about right here. So, like for instance, Mad Max, but the diagram is the same in each one.
Yeah, because he's using the same form,
every point goes to every point.
Right. Well, the diagram is the same for a reason. The diagram is showing that amongst
giving different examples
characters,
of the same thing.
I'm sorry, Brianna, go ahead.
Sorry, he's just giving different examples of the same thing, Heath.
Right. The diagram is not meant to change. The diagram is meant to be the constant. The variable are the 4 characters in each story. So
but if you tell me, hey, listen, everything goes to everything in all of these stories.
No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is if you pick any character, any point of that 4-corner, you can show that the other 3 characters, there's a point of opposition with that character you're pointing at.
Point of conflict, yeah.
Right, that there's a 3-way conflict no matter who you're pointing at. And I was actually mostly skeptical.
Okay, so you're talking about this. So I didn't highlight that.
I got here.
Notice that each character is in opposition to at least some point with the other 3. So he's trying to say, okay, I love Casino Royale. So let's look at that one because this is one that I know. So James Bond is in conflict with Carlos. James Bond is also in conflict with Le Chiffre. Le Chiffre is in conflict with Carlos. Carlos is in conflict with Vesper Lind. Vesper Lind is in conflict with...
Okay, hold on. You're reading it wrong, in my opinion.
No, I'm reading it wrong. Okay.
Okay, so what I would do is I would point at James Bond.
Okay.
And follow all of his arrows. So James Bond is in conflict. What is the conflict between James Bond and Le Chiffre?
Okay.
The conflict between James Bond and Carlos.
Okay.
And then the conflict between James Bond and Vesper Lind. So there's 3. What this diagram is trying to show is that there's a 3-way conflict pattern with James Bond and these 3 characters. And if you extend it, if you move your finger and point to Le Chiffre, you can repeat that 3-way pattern with the other 3 characters.
With Bond.
That there's actually there's a 3-way conflict no matter which character you're focusing on.
Okay, so
I thought that was pretty insightful.
Yeah, like I said, he talks about this more in his
so I missed that.
book.
So I didn't highlight that. So I just highlighted that now. So he's saying that each character is in opposition at least at some point with all of the other 3. So he's saying that in an action movie, you're supposed to set up 4 characters and all of them should be in opposition to each other.
Well, he's saying this is one way to counter some of the potential pitfalls you can run into as a writer, where if you have if it becomes too simplistic. So it's a way to add some more complexity. So for example, he's saying on the previous page how everything is settled in the final battle, and we know that's going to happen. So because the audience knows this about the form, they see all conflict leading up to the battle as a big stall. So instead of making it feel like it's a stall, you want to make it feel like each of those moments of conflict have their own risks, have their own potential ways they could go south, and that adds more interesting elements, right?
Whoever you focus on, you've got 3 other characters causing a conflict with whoever you're focusing on. So like if I'm like in Die Hard,
it's not just one person versus another. It's
right. So he's showing a complex dynamic in terms of conflict. And by the way, I was mostly skeptical and marking up the page after page after page with question marks and all until I got here. This is where I was like, okay, now this actually is interesting. This is useful. Like in Die Hard, John and Holly, you're like, oh, he's doing it all for her. They're on the verge of a divorce, or they're divorcing each other. So not a positive relationship. And that created a conflict dynamic in the story in and of itself. And then obviously a physical battle between John and Hans. That was just gladiators, right? John and Hans, the blonde-headed guy. But John and John and Carl. John and Hans was more of the intellectual battle. So it was a different conflict and a different character, and each of those setups and face-offs had a different context to them. So it was a useful example to me to see how this could actually help a writer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I missed this sentence with the highlight. I hadn't highlighted that sentence. So that's the critical part. Each character is in opposition to all of the other three. You said quadrangle.
The only of these movies that I know is Mad Max Fury Road. And so, we're thinking about Max and Furiosa. They're technically on the same side, but they're not getting along for a lot of people. So that's adding interest. If they just were like, oh, we're on the same side. Okay, yay, goody. Like that would not be as interesting as adding in this other conflict between the two of them. And so he's saying that's another way to, because that basic story would otherwise just be simple. We're going, we're on this journey. These people are chasing us. But now we're adding some additional complexity, some additional conflict, even between people that are technically allies. You have some, I don't remember all these characters, the ones that become an ally. And that adds interest to the villains as well, because they're in conflict with each other. So there's a lot that just adds more things that are interesting to watch. Yes.
Okay.
Can I go back real quick?
Yes.
To page 91 to something he said that I thought was hysterical. He's like, and right above that key point blurb on 91, he goes, the key problem the writer must solve is how to create sufficient plot. It's like, hey, thanks. Keep that in mind.
Yes, don't make it too simple. He talks about a web of oppositions as opposed to just a binary or whatever.
Okay. So I guess I missed that point, because I was like, okay, everybody's in opposition to everybody. But okay, so that was the point. Okay. So create a story where you got lots of characters and they're all in opposition to each other. That's why he likes this story, and he's demonstrating that in different movies. Mm-hmm. Okay.
To do some more conflict.
Okay.
All right.
Gotcha.
Beat number 8, training. Not in most action stories, but a big beat in some. There's a training sequence. I don't know if there's anything else to say about that one.
Well, I'll just add that it underscores
this had to do with competency.
Of competency. If my theory on what he's saying is correct, that action emphasizes the importance of competency in extreme situations, well, then training makes sense, because how do you get competent? You practice, and it's built into the story.
Oh, I did like this one thing he said in there. Where is it? There can be conflict because the trainee hates the trainer, or the trainee has some deeper psychological reason why he can't master the lessons he's being taught. So that's another element that can add some interest there.
Well, and I just have to say it. Carl Weathers has recently passed away, which was really sad. I love that actor. He was so good in all his movies. And I love that he was in Mandalorian. He's in one of the best training sequences ever with Rocky. So you can't read about training sequences and not think of Carl Weathers.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right. And then we've got number 9, game plan. So you might have an intricate plan that can help build interesting plots. This is another way that he's talking about, not falling into that pitfall of it being too simple, having an intricate plan. Let's see if I have any notes on this one.
Well, and Top Gun Maverick is a great example of how training for competency is the core of the entire story. They spend 50% of that movie practicing the maneuvers they're going to have to do in order to execute this mission against an undisclosed enemy. They're not even really defined.
That's a common structural thing I've noticed in a lot of stories, that you have the first half can be preparation. Midpoint is when you do the thing, is when you shift.
Well, and I think the reason Top Gun Maverick works is because we were so convinced visually that this is difficult. We could see the speed of those, fighter planes, and it looked hard. So I was sold on the difficulty level, and that drove the story. It was amazing.
All right, and the next.
What are you laughing at?
What am I laughing at?
Yeah,
I was laughing at the phrase, "Well, I'm going anyway."
Oh yeah.
Are you ready? I love that, and how it's become a complete like because that even goes back to what's the Glengarry Glen Ross,
Oh, yeah.
when what's his character says, well, I'm going anyway. And I'm just thinking about that how that's become such a thing that like, well, we're not ready. Well, I'm going anyway. And that was in Maverick. That was in Glengarry Glen Ross. Well, I'm going anyway.
Well, or in Indiana Jones, what's the plan? I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along.
I'm going anyway. So that's what I was thinking about.
All right, so the next three, he says, are typically kind of in the middle of the story. So number 10 is revelation leads to decision. So this is something that can happen throughout the story multiple times. The character gains new information, and then from that information, he makes a decision on how to act, moves on. So you got revelation, decision. That's kind of like that can be a repeating motif. Did I have anything to say about that? No.
I mostly agree with that.
Yeah, I was like, okay, let's go. All right. Yeah.
Yep. Some of the times there are beats where, and he doesn't even say it. That's like part of a page. It's like, okay, got it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, this feels more like in an RPG manual, like things that you could do for your story, and you could just list them 1 through 20 and say a trick, training sequence. Like, so I feel like that's how this part read to me. Like,
yeah, because he's not necessarily being prescriptive. Sometimes he's just being descriptive. Like I said, like he's not writing just here's how to write a story. He's observing. So that's part of his style of writing. His other book is like that too. He's like, here's some things I observe about these types of genres. Like that's just the style of how this is written.
Yeah, totally agree.
Number 11, drive. So he's got two things about drive. So number 11 is cat and mouse. So the opponent is also good at strategy and tactics, leading to a series of intense punches and counter punches. Multiple opponents attack the hero in quick succession. So that's like, another way to add complexity is like, this isn't, we've got a very competent hero and a very competent opponent, or multiple competent opponents. So that makes it a lot more fun. Like this person, you got a great plan. Great. They got an even greater plan. Oh no, they just ruined your plan. Now you got to have a new plan. That can kind of escalate the.
But improvisation, I would like to underscore.
Yeah, that's the next one. Number 12,
sorry.
Improvisation. Go ahead.
Yeah. I would just like to underscore that I've noticed that some of the characters that I like it the most are ones that have demonstrated their ability to be competent in the first place. Like, even remember in Arcane, there's that scene where there's like a knife attack from above, and Jinx has that minigun, and she just kind of jerks to the side, and they miss. I love moments like that where the character just reacts on instinct, and like a deadly attack is missed by inches. Do you remember that, Brianna?
Not really.
There's an attack from above, and she's not ready for it. She just senses it and just moves a couple inches to the left, and it misses her. And then she turns and successfully attacks her. Great scene. But that's what I would call improvisation.
Yes. So he's saying for that one, the plan faces setbacks, and then the hero must improvise in the moment, showing his greatness. And then he thinks this is the most important plot beat. What did you guys think about that?
I don't know if it's the most important.
No, because that seems like quite a statement, right?
Yeah.
It says that on action beat, story, drive, cat and mouse.
We're under improv.
Improvisation. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. No. Okay. Yes. Okay. No, actually, no, I tend to agree with that because I've got notes on that. Okay. So cool. Action, story, beat, drive, improvisation, because this is actually also something that Matt Bird, to bring up Matt Bird, who we also talk to on this channel, talks about a lot. So I was actually thinking a lot about Matt Bird and what he was talking about during this improvisation, and I tend to agree with that. So this has been two different authors who talk about that, because he says, okay, so you're right, key point, the hero's improvisation is the single most important plot beat in a successful action story. And I said, Matt Bird also talked about this, that how plans must fall apart. And I tend to agree with this because we're going to go through these extensive training sequences and things like that. And then we're going to hit, we're going to impact the enemy, but the enemy also gets a vote, right? Isn't that a maxim or something like that? The enemy also gets to say something about what you do. So if we have a story where you go through all of the plotting stage where this is what we're going to do. And now he actually didn't talk about Ocean's 11. Truby didn't talk about Ocean's 11
That's a caper
nearly
story.
as much as I wanted him to, especially when we get to the caper side of things. But right, that we don't want here's the caper, here's the complete setup. And then listen, it executed perfectly throughout the movie. There needs to become a point where something didn't go right, and yet our heroes are still able to respond to it, to improvise and get it right. And I think, yes, I think that's an incredibly important part. I agree with that. In The Secrets of Story, Matt Bird was talking about the TV series Mission Impossible, the original Mission Impossible TV series. And he was saying that you'd go, the team would get a mission that they've got to do that seems impossible, or a special forces force that they got to go and infiltrate something. And he said that in the early episodes, there something happens, and then you got it's a TV movie, so it's a TV show, so you go for TV, and then you get a commercial break. Then you go for a certain amount, and you get a commercial break and something like that. And that sometimes you could have it seem like the heroes were in a terrible position because they were all basically caper kinds of shows, capers about special forces, and that at a certain commercial break, it would seem like everything had gone wrong for the heroes. But then when you came back from the commercial break, oh no, they had actually anticipated that. That was exactly what they wanted, and that was part of their plan. And he said that was okay. That was okay. That can happen once in a TV show because you're going to have multiple commercial breaks. Like, oh my God, this is going away. Then when you come back from commercial break, you come back and okay, that was actually always according to plan. They had in fact anticipated that. That's what they wanted. But he said that that in the early days of that TV series, they played that more than once in an episode. Oh my God, here we go. And then oh my God, it's all falling apart again. And then when you came back from commercial break, no, actually, that was exactly what they planned for. And you could see that go on. And so he was talking about how in this in this book, The Secrets of Story, he was saying that the producers put the kibosh on that after a season or two or something like that. They said, no, you can't write stories like that anymore. You can't have it look like it's all going to hell at the end of a commercial break. And then, oh no, that's exactly what the heroes wanted to happen more than once in a TV show.
Yeah, it's borderline Deus Ex Machina.
Right. So he said that no, so the producers intervened and said, no, actually, at the midpoint of your episodes, this has to actually go to hell. And then the next part of your episode has to be the heroes figuring out how to deal with that and winning anyway. And so Matt Bird was saying that's what propelled the Mission Impossible TV show upward. Was that the producers realized you can't pull that crap more than once. Oh no, everything's gone wrong. No, we all planned for that. No, that actually the heroes have to start to improvise halfway through legitimately. Something has that the cat and mouse, the bad guys have to be good enough that they can actually counter the good guys. And then the good guys have to be good enough that they can counter the counter of the bad guys.
And you've got to be a good writer to make that convincing.
Yeah. So I completely agree with this. So when you ask about this, I mean, whether it's the most important, I don't know if most important, but essentially important, I'm agreeing with all of that. That you cannot have a situation where your good guys decide on a plan, practice for a plan, and then perfectly implement the plan.
Yeah, that would be boring. Yeah.
Boring.
Things have to go wrong.
So, right. So I'm whether it's most or second most or third most, I don't know. First, second, or third most, I don't know. I don't care. But I do agree that's essential. So I am completely with him when he says improvisation is an essential part of it.
And Heath, you just did what Brianna does, which is overlook the flaw in his wording to find the valuable statement.
Yeah.
There you go.
So I disagree. So well, I'm saying it may or may not be. But it's up there. If somebody came in and said training is number one, whatever, but it's up there. So yes, so that's part that I completely agreed with.
Heath, I think you sold me. I was a little bit more negative, but I think I was reacting too strongly to the absolute language and not focusing on the value of the improvisation of the story beat.
All right. So the next one, there's going to be an element of this that we already have critiqued, so we don't need to go over it again, but I'll just summarize what the next beat is. So for moral argument, the great versus the good. So glory is the ultimate value of action. Sometimes greatness comes at the cost of goodness. The cost of success may be immorality. To quote from him, he says, at the end of the story, the hero may be great, but no longer good. And that means the hero is even more enslaved, which is intolerable to him. This is the moral question Jesus asks in Mark 8:36 in the New Testament, because the only thing he ever quotes is the Bible. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? That's intriguing to me as someone interested in corruption arcs, that can be a way to handle. And in fact, not to spoil it for Doug, who's reading my in-progress screenplay, it is sort of kind of where I land, because it is kind of an action. It is an action story. It's more fundamentally a myth. But there is that element of like, you may succeed, but then there might be a moral cost to that success. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. What do you guys think?
Well, and by the way, there's also a moral cost sometimes to inaction,
Yes.
which is, what I think the action genre is in essence warning you against. Like doing nothing is a problem. Doing something leads to all this crazy stuff, but at least you're free,
Yeah. Any other notes on that? On that beat?
No.
All right. Well, we're moving on. So number 14. I like to number them. He doesn't number them, but I like numbering things.
He should have numbered.
I agree. It would have helped to me to process it, but everyone's brains are different. All right. So I numbered it myself. So vortex, point, and violent final battle. So now we're at the end of the story. The showdown. So you might have tight space, a unique arena, lots of combatants. There's a direct fight between the main hero and main opponents. So this is also the fastest pace of all the conflicts. So you think about like in horror where like I know if we said this before, but a thing in horror is that the intensity is going to be most, actually I think we talked about this in our very first horror conversation with Nosferatu, that like, in horror you're going, you got your increase in intensity, and then you go down to a baseline, and then fear baseline, and then your final climax, you don't go back to that baseline anymore. You keep getting more intense, and your baseline of fear is higher. So as just for comparison. And so in an action story, it's like you're going to have the fastest. So there you have more pressure on the hero. Here you have the greater speed of things are happening at a faster rate. And then the hero outfights, and I like this, outthinks. So it's not just about being physically competent. It's also about being
mentally competent.
Yeah. So all of that landed with me. What about you guys?
But I didn't have that many notes. I just wrote, of course. He's like, action emphasizes battle more than any other structure. I'm like, yeah, of course. And he talks about the fighting. Every fight, it's the fastest pace. I don't know. Some of this seemed relatively straightforward and a little bit obvious to me, I guess. But I guess if you're trying to articulate your theory, you have to lay it out. So none of this struck me as profound. I don't have too many notes.
All right.
I concur with Doug.
All right. So number 15, self-revelation. So when there is internal growth for the hero, which is his thing that he thinks that, and we're not sure if we agree, but he thinks that isn't always there. But when you have internal growth for the hero, he has a self-revelation. So there are three possible ones that could be. One, he might realize, like I was saying earlier, he took things too far, that maybe his actions weren't all moral. Another one might be in like a buddy story, that friendship is too valuable to lose. I don't remember what that means. Sorry, I'm just rereading it in the context. Okay, so that's just like adding. Okay, I get it. And then he must change from fighter to lover. That could be another one. So that you had this certain role of being the this hyper masculine warrior type character. That maybe what is missing is this is kind of how I see it. Like he has, like, this is why I was saying, like, Beast, Beauty and the Beast from perspective of Beast, that maybe what he's learning at the end here is that he's got to have some level of being tamed by his love interest or whatever that is. That there may be sort of like a settling down or yeah, but I feel like that goes straight into the next beat. You guys mind if I just summarize the next beat too?
Nope, not at all.
No, go for it.
So number 16, the final beat, farewell or communion. And so there's a question of, will the ultimate loner become part of the community? And so there's several different options. Farewell, the answer is no. So in this case, it's like, you know, I wrote to warrior TM. Like, it's like, no, I'm too much of a warrior. I can't be like a normal person. So he goes off onto the sunset, continuing being this archetype, whatever.
Or to a sequel.
Or to a sequel, exactly, exactly. That if you need to continue a series of the same archetypal character, that's probably what you were going to choose. And then number 2 might be communion and love. So that's kind of like you're talking about, you know, changing from fighter to lover. So I feel like that's a pretty common one.
Solo.
Yeah, and he was saying of the female version, I think probably feminine version is maybe what we should say, but that there may be like I put like an integration of those two attributes. So the choice may be to stay behind and become leader of the tribe. So you kind of still keeping some of that warrior archetype, but we're applying it at home, so to speak. And then
Jake Sully does that in Way of Water.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other option might be the buddy marriage. So you know, you got kind of like a bromance situation where you've got you know, you've in like a buddy story, you've got your 2 characters that are going together on this action story, and then they, you know, they're not leaving their loners. It's not like a single loner hero that is not going to join the community and he's going to continue on his role. In this case, it's kind of like the best of both worlds. There's the community that they have within their own unit, but they're still going to continue on being that archetype. You continue on with the partner. So those are different ways that he says that you might end it, and there might be some reflection or some change, or there might not be. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I didn't have much notes on that. I was going past all that.
Yeah, you know, there is such, I mean, he calls it buddy marriage, but you know, there is such a thing as just buddies.
Yeah.
You know, a marriage is a legal thing. You know, you can't just break up with your wife. You know, she'll take half your stuff.
That's a fair point. That's probably not the right word to use.
You know,
buddy,
I know.
I thought about that too. Like,
Committed
about
to each
buddy
other in a
marriage, or just like themes between friends or something like that. He uses the word marriage.
I think he's just. I think he's just trying to imply that there's a sort of a committed sense of, you know, they're not just friends. They're close friends, and they're going to continue together through thick and thin.
I took it as maybe he was just doing it tongue in cheek, like.
Yeah, I think
they're bickering.
Maybe, that's kind of like the tongue in cheek kind of thing, right? Because he does say variation on the communion. On the communion option is the action hero, quote, marries, unquote, his or her partner. The buddy story depicts a, open quote, marriage between 2 men, a, open quote, bromance, or 2 women. The end of the buddy story almost shows the 2 heroes renewing their, open quote, marriage, close quote, even as they bicker on their way into the sunset. I think I would just rather him written that paragraph as what he actually meant, instead of using
the quotation,
a bunch of scare quotes around terms. So instead of like, quote, you know, in this story, there's going to be a marriage between 2 friends, and they ride off into the sunset. Like, stop with the scare quotes and just actually tell me what you're actually trying to say. Like, what in this story, there's a bromance. Like, what is this? Like, that's the stuff that irritates me about this book. Like, don't just tell me actually what you mean by this theory.
Well, and his very next statement is
like, stop it. Just stop it. Stop. No one legitimately goes, in this story, they will end with a bromance.
You're adding a lot of character to this that's probably not intended.
Like, no one takes that seriously. Tell me what you mean, Truby. Tell me what you mean. there will be a marriage and a bromance between some friends. Stop.
Well,
Stop.
I gotta say, in my notes, I agree on some level.
That's stupid.
Well, in my notes, I was like, well, a friendship is a relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean marriage. Like that is a different relationship, and I think fundamentally different than a friendship. And it's funny because he puts in as a key point that the buddy story portrays marriage without the pain. And I'm like, really? I've had some major fights with friends. There's pain with friends. It's not the same, but
I've had a falling out with a friend that I suspect is on the same level as a breakup. Complicated reasons.
The common ingredient is both are relationships.
Yeah.
A friendship is a relationship, a marriage is a relationship, but they are very different. And I think that I think it's important to make that distinction because the bonds between friends in an action film are absolutely not the same as the bonds between me and my wife. Like there's almost nothing in common. We don't go on many action quests, at least not by day.
Thank you.
I'm going to write a story of our great quests. My kids will love it.
Oh man.
Action date night.
Not gonna lie, I feel like I need a quick little what's the word where you have a break in the middle of a movie?
Intermission.
Yeah, would you guys mind? It was just before we've just finished all of the beats before we get into the rest.
No.
Pete, do you have any elevator music we could play for?
Oh, let me tell you, the best thing possible is feeding the ducks.
Is what? I think that's the perfect intermission music. I will be back.
I like it.
All right,
Brianna
so feeding the ducks here in intermission.
This is called Feeding the Ducks.
Feeding the ducks, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So
I like you, Heath. I think I had a lot of issues with his wording and his the way he's communicating. It kept every time he's like, the hero always does this. I immediately was like, not in this movie. Every single time I could always come up with an immediate example that said that's not true.
Because he gives a bunch of examples that overlap.
Yeah.
And the action I thought was rather weak. Now I was trying to go with him, like we talked about the world of story, the introduction, or I think it was chapter 1 actually, and then horror, and I was trying to understand him. I thought that the chapter on action was the weakest I had read yet.
I struggled with it too. I felt there was a lot of in general, action is like this, and action has this in it, and action has this, and it's like, at some points, I was like, yeah, I know, I knew that, I know that, I get that this happens in action movies. So yeah,
now
Sable says this wasn't a profound chapter to me.
I didn't think so. Sable says I thought myth was a mess was compared to action. Now I had a lot more notes in myth. Because Sable says myth tries to get very philosophical and has zero foundation offered for very presented as such. Now it could be that's why I had so many more notes. I was like, oh my God, I got a lot of notes to write in myth. But there's so much overlap even in what I thought he was talking about between those two chapters that I thought that it was very difficult to distinguish, especially since he only brings up the hero's journey starting in myth.
Right.
Because he brings up Campbell and the hero with 1,000 faces and all of that, which we actually really need to get into here. I was actually writing down for the table talk that we need to do a hero with 1,000 faces. We need to do the Odyssey. We need to do the Iliad. We need to do Beowulf.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, so we need to be getting into those kinds of things. But I thought that it was interesting that he tackled, just from his schema that he's trying to lay out, I thought that it was interesting that he chose to tackle Joseph Campbell in myth. I can see reasons for that, but I also would see reasons for tackling that in action. And he ignores it in action and only deals with it in myth. And so it's a really interesting division that he ends up with. Because I can see like when we're talking about the action story here, I can obviously see elements of the hero's journey in this.
Yeah, of course.
But he doesn't address the hero's journey at all until myth.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I'm not sure he found the unified theory of genre yet, but it certainly merits discussion, and it's an awfully ambitious approach to classifying genres. I never even thought of that. But like you said, there's so many issues that I feel like I can easily poke holes in that I don't know if I'm. And then he moves on to the next thing. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not sold yet, and then I'm already on the next.
Is he just not going to come on the stream now?
Well, believe it or not, one of my thoughts was, I wonder if he were explaining this to me one-on-one, if I'd be like, oh, I see what you're saying. Like, is it possible that this all makes sense?
Yeah, no. I wanted the same thing. I would love to talk to him because the kinds of questions that I'm bringing up here on the stream are the kinds of things that I would love to bring up to him on
and then
the
have
stream
him answer
and try to understand, because it's possible that I'm just not understanding what he's trying to communicate here.
Well, because he's turned this into a worldwide masterclass.
Right. And I'm fascinated with, like we said, the idea in the beginning of this hierarchy of genre and the like the Maslow's hierarchy of human needs that we're going to be addressing in story. I mean, that's why I was like, when I first started reading this, I was like, oh my God, this is fascinating. Whether or not I agree with it, I don't know, but I've never heard this articulated this way before, so I want to get into this in a major way. So that's why I was like, oh my God, let's read it. Let's find out what this is about. But I'm not sold.
Yeah, that was my thing as well. I expect a book to drive home its points, and I feel like he glides through them, which doesn't necessarily disqualify him, but it certainly made it hard for me to continue to build off the ideas if there's so many unresolved issues in my rearview mirror as we go forward.
But by now, like we had mentioned, that it would have been so nice if he had an example of the quintessential action story.
And I totally agree. That would have been a perfect way to organize
break it down and say, like, this one hits everything an action story is supposed to do. Oh, and nothing else.
Right.
This is the action story, and then you can see what it succeeds at, and then also what it fails at. And I feel like he could have built the argument from that basis.
In fact, that's a great point. Organizationally speaking, if he had action, this movie, this story.
Right.
Here's why. Here's how we could deconstruct it. Here's variations of this film or this story. It would just help me have that basis, that something to ground myself in his theories as he explores all the different variations of an idea.
So for example, just for the benefit of the audience, in his book, here's what he says is examples of action, which in many cases are overlapping genres. He says examples of action: Die Hard, Mad Max 1-4, Terminators 1-2, Raiders: The Lost Ark, Gladiator, Gunga Din, Aliens. He doesn't say once. That's interesting that he does not say Alien. He does just say Aliens. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero, The Bourne Identity, The Bourne Ultimatum, Speed, John Wick, Taken, Kill Bill 1-2, True Lies, Casino Royale, Goldfinger, Mission Impossible, The Hunt for Red October, Face Off, Iron Man, The Hidden Fortress, Sojourner, and Yojimbo. I don't know that one.
I think we need to turn off the elevator music.
Okay. Oh, she's back. So we're back. We can turn that off now. You're right. The intermission is over. You're back. So there we go.
That wasn't really an intermission, though. You guys kept talking.
But
okay.
We talked with music.
Is there anything else? Like, so he does talk about after that what we just talked about, war stories specifically, and then also sports stories specifically. When I was thinking about Mighty Ducks. I was thinking a lot about Mighty Ducks. And actually, I remember Brianna talking about sports stories when I was talking to her years ago being its own genre, and also animal sports stories being its own genre.
Oh, like Secretariat.
Or Air Bud.
Yeah, a subgenre of a subgenre, maybe.
Because I was thinking about when I was reading the sports as genre. I don't. For instance, I was always thinking of the Mighty Ducks. The Mighty Ducks were coming up as an example all the time, and he did mention the Thomas Crown Affair as a as a caper. I love the Thomas Crown Affair. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, I cracked up with him giving examples of war films because I don't feel like I don't feel like I needed to know that. It's like, Doug, Saving Private Ryan is a war film. Black Hawk Down is another example. It's like, okay.
Yeah, but then if he didn't give examples of like, there are other times when he doesn't give examples and you guys complain.
But when we broke down Black Hawk Down, we said that was a catastrophe film.
Which one?
When we broke down Black Hawk Down, we said this story follows the structure of catastrophe.
Yeah,
but it is also a war film. But I agree with you. It follows. It's a tragedy. It's like Titanic.
I'm going through my notes. So there's not much. I mean, there's plenty, things that I thought were interesting. But I don't know if there's anything to discuss so far.
Well, like I said, after that, he goes into the distinction between war films and sports films quite a bit, and gives a lot of stuff on sports.
Yeah, my note here was, so he's like, these are epic and war films. I was like, okay. And then he's like, and these are caper and sports stories.
Oh,
I kind of laughed because those really have very little in common, but he's grouping them together
as action stories, which I think
right.
That's fair because they're all about taking physical action.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think
Caper
you're correct.
Is the one that makes me a little bit uncertain.
Well, no, I think you're correct structurally. The caper story is very much like Top Gun Maverick. Here's the goal. Here's our tactical approach to this. Let's do it. Oops, everything went wrong. How are we going to still pull off the caper? So structurally, I think it makes sense. It's just funny seeing these under his structure. What ends up getting grouped together seems sometimes a little bizarre on the surface.
He does say this. I highlighted this about caper. He said, some people believe the caper story glorifies theft.
I don't know who thinks that.
Really? Okay. Well, I mean, I could see that.
Well, have you ever been motivated to rob a bank because the movie made it look cool?
That's not the same thing as, you could still say it glorifies something, even if it doesn't mean that you then want to go do it.
Well, but still, is it glorifying? Is it glorifying crime, or is that the story that we're telling?
Well, but see, here's his language again. Okay, but let's look at his language.
Oh boy.
Some people believe the caper story, and he doesn't talk about Ocean's 11, which in my opinion is the greatest caper movie. I love Ocean's 11.
Yeah,
man, I love Ocean's 11. That's a caper movie. He says some people believe the caper story glorifies theft. Does Ocean's 11 glorify theft? My answer would be yes. Okay, but he says not so. He is completely counter to me. I would say yes, Ocean's 11 is the glorification of theft. It may be other things as well. I think it's definitely other things. I don't think it's only the glorification of theft. But if you ask me, in addition to many other things that Ocean's 11 does as a caper film, does it glorify theft? I would say yes. Truby is completely 100% counter to my position because he says,
doesn't make it
so. He says no. So when I watch Ocean's 11 and somebody says, did that glorify theft? And I go, yes, it did. Truby's like, no, Heath, you're wrong. It does not. He says, no, it does not.
Yeah, so you personally, he's saying you personally, Heath.
He says that I am wrong. He says that my opinion on that is wrong. Right, yes. He says, not so. Okay, so I interpreted that incorrectly. That was not a glorification of theft.
Or you have two different opinions.
Right. Well, but that's why, that's why I have so much respect for Maxwell Alexander Drake, because he flat out says, I'm not wrong, but you might not be either.
Right.
And
I do think
I'm
that's
not wrong
important
because
in
here's my
communication to
opinion.
build that
Although
in.
you may have a different opinion, that one may also be correct. I have tremendous respect for that opinion. But Truby's not saying that. He's saying completely that my opinion is wrong. That
Yeah,
when
yours-
I saw
yours
that, I'm
specifically.
incorrect on that.
You seem to be taking this personally. That's why I'm.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, right. Because like when I listen to someone like Drake explain his position, in which appears to be a much more sophisticated way,
Mhm.
this is a very unsophisticated way to explain this opinion. Some people believe the caper story glorifies theft. Not so. Does war movies glorify violence? My opinion is yes, in conjunction with a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Well, what was the rest of his argument? You didn't.
Okay, it says this. Some people believe the caper story glorifies theft. He says, not so. To see what the caper story is really about. Oh, I don't understand what the caper story is really about.
His argument, and then you can. And then
To
you
see
can
what the
argue it.
caper story is really about, we have to think of it in the following thought experiment. How can someone defeat a real world that is closed, hierarchical, and lawful?
Oh, yeah.
How can someone defeat a world that is closed, hierarchical, and lawful? And my mind immediately went to through theft. Obviously, that's the answer. Through theft. Obviously, that's the answer. But he says, how can someone defeat a world that is closed, hierarchical, and lawful? He says the solution to make life a game where the individual beats the system. How did the individual beat the system? Through theft. Through theft. That's what's in this movie. Through theft. Exactly. The individual did beat the system through theft. That's what this movie was about. And so the caper story is born. So I don't understand what he's saying. I mean, that's the argument. That's the whole paragraph.
Is this the most worked up we've seen Heath on?
I was just going to say, I am a little afraid of Heath right now.
I'm coming at this completely trying to understand his argument because I thought his argument was so fascinating about this hierarchy of genre. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And yet every time I read what he says, I don't understand it. Like, what is that? What is that paragraph?
What page is it?
It can't be as simple as you have a
page
different perspective
118.
than he does.
Okay, that's why I'm not finding
that
my
makes
notes.
no sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it can glorify theft. A caper movie can glorify theft. In addition to providing many other messages throughout the story. For instance, you might say, on the most superficial level possible, Ocean's 11 glorifies theft, but that it also does other things throughout its story. Likewise, you could say Saving Private Ryan glorifies violence. Yes, on the most superficial level possible, but it also provides you much more meaning throughout that story.
Why does this make you angry, Heath?
Because I have given Truby every benefit of the doubt throughout reading every bit of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I've defended him by saying I'm trying to understand his point. And then he gives me a paragraph like that that's impossible to even comprehend.
But why does that make you angry?
Because I've invested a tremendous amount of time trying to understand his argument because it's so fascinating.
You feel like your time's
and so if I spend hours trying to comprehend your argument because you present something so fascinating, don't give me an incoherently written paragraph. That pisses me off.
Well, we'll just okay.
Right on, Heath. Right on. Hey, that was a rant, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
That qualifies.
So, I mean, I don't know what to do with it from there. So, where do you go from there?
Just say you disagree and move on. That's what I do.
No, it's not that I disagree, because if he had a coherently formed point then
Then
I
you
would
don't know
go,
what his
oh, I
point is.
disagree with that. It's that he hasn't written anything coherent for me to disagree with. So to disagree with something is to admit that someone has a coherent point. Like, I don't even think that was a coherent paragraph.
See, I think so here's my take on that. I highlighted that sentence too, with a huge question mark around it. Like, what are you trying to say? I have a lot of question marks through here, and I take those as almost like throwaway statements. Like, you're holding them to it. Like, you're saying, like, you need to make sense here, which you are correct. Like, if you're going to write a book, like, by the way, I'm preparing myself for this, and I'm very nervous about it. I'm going to run into Angry Heath.
Because somebody like me could read it. Right?
There's going to be Angry Heath in a crowd. He's going to be like, how dare you write this? And I'm going to have to respond to that. So as a writer, that's I feel like Mr. Truby has several times written things carelessly that
absolutely.
if you're trying to pin it down and your patience is wearing out and you try to pin something down, you might lose the reader. And I think that is a communication flaw, because that's the only sin you can make if you're trying to communicate, is to do it so ineffectively that you lose the person that you care to talk to, who you want to understand you. To me, that's a bad thing. You don't want to lose someone to that extent. I don't mind if people disagree with me. I don't mind if people say, like, you're wrong or I have a different opinion. But to have lost them through incoherent comments, I think is a mistake.
Yeah,
that's a big problem.
I think that probably for the most part comes down to, like we've said many times, like, it's such an ambitious book.
Yeah.
And there's so much, and instead of being able to flesh out his ideas, like, there's so much of him just asserting things. Like, he doesn't, like what you're describing, he didn't make an argument, he just asserted it. But if he were to make an argument for every single point he makes, this book would be 4 times as long.
But I still think the editor should. That's an editorial.
Well, that means that probably just shouldn't be there at all.
Or do that, right? Don't even write it.
It should just be a. If you're going to be high level, then you got to be high level, rather than, you know what I'm saying? Like,
well, let me counter, or at least provide an alternative to that. When you're trying to be high-minded or make a statement or come up with an idea, you have to acknowledge the fact that this is not absolutism. It was very important to me when I was writing The Heroine's Labyrinth to leave a lot of doors open, because people are going to say, well, what about this? That's a valid point. I'm not trying to say that this is invalid. The way he speaks sometimes closes those doors on me. And I think what he's talking about, he just closed the door on the idea that this could possibly glorify a caper or crime. It does make it sexy. In fact, Ocean's 11 is the sexiest style crime ever filmed, you know? So it's important as a communicator to leave doors open, so that if someone challenges you and they have a good point, you haven't closed the door on that person. I think the more you close doors on people when you're trying to articulate a point, the more you might start to alienate people. And you were asking, like, Heath, why are you so upset? Heath probably feels a little alienated from the theories being put out, because too many doors have been closed on his face while he's trying to read through this. Anyway, that's just a theory, but it's important to keep some wiggle room when you're presenting new ideas like this. And I think sometimes he takes that casually.
Yeah, no, I know, I agree with that. Yeah.
And that was pretty epic, by the way. I like that.
Well, thank
you.
I was like, what is going on by this time? By that time, I got to this paragraph.
Heath, your rant falls into epic action.
I have just one more note from this chapter, so I guess that's good. I guess it means we can maybe move on if you guys have the energy to do another chapter.
Go ahead. Yeah.
This was talking about. This is a very minor note, but it was just the only other thing I thought was worth noting. Talking about opposition. So we mentioned earlier, like the 4-point opposition. He's talking about in a war story, you may also have some of the ways that the other forms of conflict can be kind of like a chain of command and sort of like a hierarchical conflict, so you're dealing with issues of, some of the difficulties of following orders. Like that's another level of complexity that you can add in there. I feel like that just intuitively comes up when you're writing that kind of a story. But the only other thing I thought was that was worth noting for me. Yep. Because it's like, you're dealing with, right, if you're in a war story, you've got the enemies over there, but you're not always going to be fighting them. So that would be boring. So there has to be conflict that's closer. In other words. Anything else you about the action genre?
Okay.
Sports stories.
Don't cheat. That was in this. No, don't cheat.
Yeah. There were some, different things that were different beats to the sports story. I'm not into sports myself, so I find that I can't.
Well, the sport. I would say that I was trying to remember a lot of sports stories that I watched as a kid with movies, because it seems like it was actually a lot of them, like Air Bud. I don't know, but I remember that one. But
I remember
the Mighty Ducks was a major one. Man, we loved the Mighty Ducks as a kid, and I watched those over and over again.
I do like sports movies.
The Little Giants was a sports movie so we watched, and I was trying to pay attention to those beats as I was watching that. But okay, so action movie in the context of a sports movie. Okay, so
The Natural, Miracle. I love Miracle. And it's true. I've actually read an entire theory on sports being a substitute for war, and I've adopted that even in my book.
War masturbation is something I heard someone say once that made me laugh so much. Sports
war masturbation.
Anyway.
Okay, maybe. Well, except that so many people like to watch this way. I do think you're
living it vicariously.
Well, yeah. Well, it is true, and it's also presented in a safe. You're safe in your seat. You're not in danger when you're watching the Chariots race in the Hippodrome. It's like you get to see all the fury of war from a safe distance, and that's alluring. And it is hyper competency that people like to watch. So much so that sports is a fixture in almost all civilizations. So anyway, he says something. Heath, I'll try to contain myself, but. When I was
give us an angry rant.
No, I'm
I might have mine in the myth. We'll see.
But I wrote in capital letters, "What?" And then the next sentence, "What?" He goes, and I quote, "One of the main reasons someone plays the fabricated contest of a game or sport is to evaluate life and worth in a moment." That is not why my 11-year-old son is playing baseball.
That sounds
at all. And then he follows up with, "Winning gives us the illusion that our entire life will be a success." Not at all. In fact, I would take the exact opposite. When I win a race, and I'm like, oh my, because I went downstate as a track guy in high school. And it was so thrilling because you did it this one time, and then tomorrow you're going to have to do it again, and you might lose. So you appreciate, like, oh my God, at least I did it today. God, hope I could do it again. I'm going to have to practice really hard. So everything he said, like, I'm like, and he's saying it again.
You think this is the guy that's probably never played sports?
He did say he had some ties to sports, right? He was a coach. So he's not detached from this. I think he's saying this from a reflective older man's position, that's what he sees and that he wants someone to appreciate when they're playing sports. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying the main reason someone plays fabricated contest of a game or a sport is to evaluate life and the worth of a moment. That's not why we do that. That is not why people play sports.
Why do people
it may be something you acquire, but it's certainly not why we do it. So anyway, again, it was an absolutist statement. This is what I'm trying to say, that the absolutist language is another door that's shut. And sometimes it's like you start going like this, being like, really? Is that it? That's the only reason we play sports? Is that why Jacob, my son, is playing?
I would be curious. I'm putting you on the spot. It's totally fine if you don't have an answer, but I'd be curious to know what you're just right off the top of your head. What might you assert is the reason why people play sports?
I think competition. You want to see how good you are. Where do you rank? How fast are you? Can you win a race? Also athleticism. Like as a boy, so I have 2 sons, and Jacob, for example, he's just jumping. He just jumps. Like every time he walks under a door, jumps. Dad, you know what
he does the slap the door thing?
Yeah, he's always he's jumping, he's dribbling, and he's always doing something. And if I'm outside watching a movie or let's say a baseball game, he doesn't sit next to me and we just watch the game. He's running around while I throw a ball while I'm watching the game.
You still here, Brianna?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There's Doug.
Oh, I'm still
go
here.
for it. No, go for it. Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, there's a certain behavioral pattern that I noticed that my sons are doing. He wants to catch something. He wants to jump and tap. He's always wanting to test himself. Well, guess what sports is going to do? Exactly that. And you're up against guys that are your age that are also jumping up and hitting the door, also playing catch with their dad, also dribbling. Where do you rank? How do you stack up? And if you lose, you're not done. You can practice and you can get better. And that process is in itself a passion you could pour yourself into. I've done it. I played football and I played track, and that's why I played it. I wanted to get better at something, and and the beauty of sports is you have a metric. You could see exactly if you got better or not.
Yes.
As a writer, it's harder to tell, right? We don't really know if we're getting better. Sometimes it feels like we're plateauing, and then one day maybe you write something and people are like, "Oh wow, I like this one." You're like, "Really? You?" But sports tells you. Yeah. Here's another thing I wrote. Sports tells you you're this fast. You're faster today. All the work you've been putting into it paid off, and we can measure it. Sports measures it. It's very statistical based, and I think it gives you a metric of improvement, and I think that appeals to a lot of people.
Is there anything else that needs to be said about action?
I got nothing.
Okay. Then let me read. May I read his last paragraph to lead us into myth, so that we know how he leads into myth, and then I'll let you take it, Brianna.
Okay.
So this is how he transitions from understanding action into myth. Truby says, the life philosophy of the action genre moves beyond that of the horror form by shifting our focus from death, which we can't control, to life, which we can. Which, again, I'm fascinated by this general philosophy. This recipe for success in the quantifiable areas of life is highly effective. But while it may take us to a high level of achievement, that doesn't necessarily make for a rich and fulfilling life. Again, I'm fascinated by that idea. The next rung up the ladder of good living is myth, which shows us how to grow over the full course of our lives. So that's what he's trying to do.
So myth excites me. I think I would consider myself to be a big myth fan, to the extent that one can be a fan of that genre, which is something I identified before reading this. I don't know, sometime in the past year or two. I was like, what I really like is myths. Like more so than, like I've always say, oh, I'm a fantasy sci-fi. It's like, well, it's not all fantasy. It's not all sci-fi. It's not all, it's myth. And I've had a hard time defining it, and this chapter helped me define it a little bit more. So I just want to lead with that. Like, I'm appreciating this. I'm someone that likes to read, old epics that are thousands of years old for pleasure, for fun. So I'm definitely a myth fan. And a lot of this chapter I really liked. All the beats I think really resonated with me. I don't remember having any issues with that. And some of it was kind of opened my eyes a bit to understand even more why I like this genre. But as with horror, once he starts getting into some of the religion stuff at the end, that's where I have some issues. So we'll get to that.
So full disclaimer.
That and how he talks about evolution is, that's why I'm going to try not to rant myself.
So full disclaimer, I did not finish this chapter. I read it and I got through some of it, and I actually responded a lot to this chapter, whereas I felt very much antagonized while reading and a little resistant and very, very much questioning and unfulfilled while reading action, I started to perk up with myth. Now, I didn't finish it. I only got maybe 20% into it, but I started to get excited about it. And he also covers what he calls the female myth, which started to cross over into a lot of what I've spent so much of my life lately studying. So I did. I responded to this, but Brianna, I did not finish it. So I don't know if he goes off the rails.
Well,
are you fine with going through the whole chapter despite not having finished it?
I'll just throw this out there. Do you guys want to consider doing this on another night?
That's another thing I was going to ask. Like, we spent a long time talking about action. We could very well let myth be its own night. I guess that's kind of up to you, Heath. It's your channel.
We're 3 hours in. I don't have a problem with going forward. I know, Brianna, often you like to, or the one who wants to end earlier.
I get it. As if I take another break, maybe at some point, maybe I get to a point where sometimes I get tired and I lose words. But I'm fine for now because I did just take a break. But I'm also would be totally fine with moving it to another day because I would like to hear Doug's full thoughts. But when did you finish, Doug? Where did you stop?
So I am on page 141.
141.
Okay, that's rather early in myth.
Yeah, so I'm just flipping through. There's a lot left. Jesus Christ, how long does this go?
It's a big chapter. Yeah, I feel like I will leave the decision up to you.
Well, there is a lot in myth. I made a lot more notes in myth than I did in action. And specifically some things about the heroine's labyrinth, because he talks about the heroine's cycle and that we left the heroine's cycle because men tell stories and all of that. And so there is all of that. So I actually felt that the myth chapter, whether or not we agree with it or whatever, was more interesting than the action chapter. So if we want to hold myth for another time, in a few weeks, I'm fine with that. And let's attack myth with our full. Well, I want to be able to attack it with my full energy because
now we know what that means.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
We have seen the limits, the height of your action ability.
Okay. Well, all right. So this has actually turned out to be a great book because it's inspired so much conversation.
That's why I recommended it. Yeah.
So I completely agree with you, Brianna, that this is that I found that generally on live streams as well with the comments and things like that. When you find something that inspires a lot of conversation, it doesn't matter whether we agree with it or not.
Exactly.
But what's important is if it's engendering a lot of important conversation. Okay, so then let's just hold myth to another day. We'll just attack myth on its own day.
And Keith, just to piggyback your point, the fact that we're talking about this for as long as we are, even if we're being critical, is actually a big compliment to Mr. Truby because even when I am talking about the heroine's labyrinth and in certain, wherever I'm, the people who are the most critical of me are usually the people that care the most about what I'm talking about. Yes. So I don't take that personally, and I never will. I always take it as a compliment. What they're asking for by being critical is clarity. That's what they're asking for. Have you thought this out enough? Did you think about this? What do you think about that? They want answers on things that they're unclear about. And hopefully you can provide that. And that's why I think closing doors on people is a dangerous practice because maybe they're going to bring up something you haven't thought about. Maybe they're going to contest you on a point that you're willing to concede. Why close all those doors? Why speak in absolutist language? Be careful, keep the doors open, and keep the dialogue going. But that said, this book has inspired a lot of wheels spinning from people who really care about storytelling. So because I think of its ambitious aim, what it's trying to do.
Okay. Well, then we'll do that. I agree because that, I mean, it's the same thing. Like we're sometimes critical of people who always talk about critiquing like Star Wars. But why do they do that? It's because they actually do care about
They're
Star Wars.
passionate people,
Because,
yes.
right, yeah, because, and I completely agree. I forget who said this, like the worst thing, I think it may have been one of the books that we've read, like the worst thing that can possibly happen to you is apathy. You know, as far as like that, oh my God, I wrote something and nobody cared about it. That's actually the worst thing. The worst thing is not I wrote something and oh my God, everyone hated it. Because that does mean that they cared.
They felt something.
They cared something, they hated it. The worst thing that happened to you is I wrote this thing and it got out there, and then everyone is completely apathetic to what that.
I want to give a personal example of that. Of roughly a decade ago was when I finished. It was my first time writing my own novel. The first time I wrote a complete novel. So of course it's one of the worst things I've written. But one of the things that stood out to me when I had that experience, I'm always like, whenever I always want people's feedback and everything I write. It's super important to me. It's the only way you can grow. And I noticed that nobody said anything about my characters. Nobody was like, nobody hated them. Nobody liked them. I didn't prompt. I would just I would let people read things and then I would just see how they reacted. I still do that sometimes. So just let's just see if they say anything about this, one way or another. And nobody said anything. And I was like, that means my characters suck. So I spent the next few years studying how to write characters. So I was like, nobody has any feelings about my characters. So, yeah, that's, you want people to have some reaction, even if it's a negative one. That means they care. Yeah.
Well, again, and negativity could actually be frustration for clarity, which is a good thing. you know?
So I guess this means that this has been an excellent book, Brianna, to recommend for this stream.
It has
been for the stream. Yes, definitely.
Yes, this has been.
Yes.
Well, but I mean, I've got tons of notes, so I'm engaging with this book at a very consistent level. So,
that's what I love is books that make me think.
We'll do myth. We'll do myth on, and we'll look at the schedule and come up with it.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff I'd love to cover here.
I mean, if we may end up finding that, as much as this will take us forever, a million years, we may end up finding that might end up being how we want to do the book.
Yeah, it could be. And then it could be that Truby sees this and is like, "No, I'm never coming on to talk to
and he never wants to.
Well, believe it or not, in the early part of the myth chapter, I noticed he talks about the female myth. Mm-hmm. Now, Shari Lee is going to be reaching out to Mr. Truby and seeing if he wants to come on the show.
Do it after we talk about myth, I think, because that's going to be most relevant.
All right. Well, yeah. We should talk about myth first. Yes.
Yeah, because that's we should bring him on force. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, totally. I'm just saying that a lot of what I'm writing in the Heroine's Labyrinth supports some of his theory.
Oh, cool.
Because he's saying certain things without, I think we point out there's not a lot of backup for it. Well, I can back up some of it. So anyway, it would it might be an interesting conversation there.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, then, everybody, we will close then. We're doing Dune. By the way, read Dune. We're Dune's coming. I forget when Dune's coming out, but I've already gone to the audiobook. I know Brianna's going through it. Doug's already read Dune.
I'm gonna rewatch the first one.
I've already rewatched the movie. I'm gonna rewatch the movie again before we
re-released in the theaters. So I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, gear up on your Dune, guys.
Just gear up on Dune. If you're looking for an excuse to read the Dune book. Mm-hmm. Do it now. Here's your excuse, because we're going to be talking about both Dune and the Dune movie when it comes out. We're going to do Dune 1, Dune Part 1, before the Dune Part 2 comes out as a movie. And then the next week, we'll be talking about Dune 2. So if you're looking for an excuse to get, it's an audiobook. By the way, I will say that if you say, I can't read it, but you could listen to an audiobook, I did get the audiobook that was the it's like an audio production. It's actually the one that has the movie poster as its thing on like Apple. That's how I got it through, but it's probably through other things as well. And it's fantastically well done. Now we'll talk, but as far as the production goes, that one was fantastic. So I don't know if you're working a job or something like that where you can listen to something and you're like, hey, I'd like to listen to go through Dune before the movie comes out. Go through that one. Because in a couple of weeks, when Brianna's back, we'll be doing Dune. So
I can't wait to reread Dune.
Years ago, I tried to read the physical version, and I couldn't. It was just not the right reader for it. I was bored. I was not engaged. But then I've listened.
Oh, really?
no. I bet it might be timing too. I think at the time I just hated Chosen One stories, so it was just immediately a turnoff. But I've been listening to an audiobook is a very different experience, and I find parts that I would have been bored reading, I find interesting to hear people performing it. It's just a different experience.
I'll be honest, I prefer audiobooks, but I read Dune last year and I by hand, like the regular classic read, and I loved it. It was actually very fun. In a weird way, I accidentally can imagine it more because I've seen more of it, But anyway, it's going to be a good one.
All right. So everybody take care of all of that. So there we go. We'll be talking about that. Doug and I got to talk to Doug about what we're talking about next week. I don't know, but Doug and I will be talking about something next week. But have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. We'll push. I got to go update the thumbnail and the title of this episode to remove myth. But we'll come back to myth later. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being with us in the chat. It was amazing. I will see you tomorrow on the morning grind. I don't even know what today is. This Thursday. So, all right. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Today's not Thursday. Today's Tuesday.
Oh, today's Tuesday? Okay, never mind.
We'll start with a T.
No, I don't know. I might see you Thursday. I don't even know. I don't even know what day it is. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Later. Have a wonderful night.